Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Bleach as a god and fell in love with Retsu Unohana? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. A World of Echoes. The first sensation was not sight or sound, but the prickle of dry grass against his cheek. It was a humble, grounding feeling, the sort of trivial detail a man on the verge of death might cling to. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was the first anchor in a reality he no longer recognized. He remembered fire, not the warm, comforting blaze of a campfire, but the ravenous, world-ending inferno of energies tearing creation asunder. He remembered the feel of his own power, a sun-bright maelstrom, meeting an opposing force of absolute, soul-crushing darkness. A final, desperate clash. A final Rasengan that held the hopes of a world. And then, nothing. A silent, featureless void that stretched for an eternity or a single, breathless second. Now, there was grass. He pushed himself up, his movements fluid and strangely effortless. The aches, the phantom pains of 100 battles, the deep, thrumming exhaustion that had been his constant companion for years, they were all gone. He looked at his hands. They were his, yet not. The skin was smooth, unblemished by the calluses and scars that had mapped out his life story. He wore simple, unfamiliar white trousers and a loose-fitting tunic. The fabric feeling clean and new against his skin. He stood, taking in his surroundings. He was on a gentle, windswept hill overlooking a sprawling shantytown. Dilapidated wooden shacks, patched with scrap metal and frayed cloth, huddled together as if for warmth. A dusty, rutted path snaked through them, disappearing into a haze of what looked like endless, identical dwellings. The air was thin and carried a faint, sterile scent. Like old paper and ozone. There was no birdsong, no hum of insects, just the whisper of the wind and the distant, muted murmur of voices. This wasn't his world. The sky was a perpetual, pearlescent twilight, lacking a sun or moon. The spiritual energy in the atmosphere, and there was an abundance of it, felt different. Sharper. Colder. It wasn't the warm, vibrant chakra he had known his entire life. This was something else, a river of souls flowing around him. A memory, sharp and agonizing, pierced through his calm. Kurama. The roar of his friend, the surge of shared power, the final desperate gambit. A wave of profound, soul-deep loneliness washed over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. He had failed. They had lost. Everything and everyone he had ever fought for was gone. Consumed by that final, terrible collision. Yet, here he was. Alive. He closed his eyes, reaching inward for the familiar, burning presence of the nine tails, for the wellspring of his own chakra. He found neither. In their place was something new. A quiet, boundless ocean of golden light that felt less like a power he wielded and more like the very substance of his being. It was warm, serene, and thrummed with the unmistakable rhythm of life itself. He wasn't a container for power anymore. He was power. A different kind. A purer kind. He took a step, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to sigh in relief. The dry, yellowed grass around him stirred, a faint viridian blush spreading from where his foot had touched. He knelt, pressing his palm flat against the earth. The golden light flowed from him, not as a conscious act, but as naturally as breathing. The circle of green widened, small, nameless white flowers pushing up through the soil with impossible speed. Turning their faces to him as if he were the sun. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki of Konoha. That person had died with his world. He was something else. A remnant. An echo given new form. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few weeks, or what he perceived as weeks in this timeless land, he settled into a routine. He drifted down from his hill into the squalor of the 80th district of the Rukongai. A place the residents called Zaraki. It was a place defined by what it lacked. Hope, food, safety. Souls here were listless, worn down by an eternity of scraping by. They fought over scraps, huddled in fear from the hollow-eyed bullies and thugs who preyed on the weak, and faded slowly from the sheer weight of their own despair. He didn't announce his presence. He simply was. One day, a small girl, no older than 7, collapsed in the street, her body racked with a soul fever that was slowly eating her away. Her grandmother wept over her, her cries thin and hopeless. Naruto knelt beside them, a quiet presence in the dusty alley. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and placed his hand on the child's forehead. The golden light, soft as morning dew, flowed into her. The fever broke instantly. The gray pallor of her skin receded, replaced by a healthy flush. The girl, Yui, opened her eyes, clear and bright, and stared up at the stranger with the sun. Gold hair and eyes the color of a world she'd never seen. Word spread not as a shout, but as a whisper. The silent man in the white tunic. The one whose touch could mend a broken limb, cure the incurable soul sickness, and even coax a withered vegetable patch back to life. They began to call him Kogan-sama, the Golden Lord. They brought him their sick, their injured, their dying. He never asked for payment, never sought praise. He simply healed, his expression one of calm, detached compassion. He was a force of nature, a wellspring of life in a land saturated with death and decay. But his presence did not go unnoticed by the district's informal rulers. A gang of brutish souls, led by a hulking man named Gyuki who wore a cracked bone mask over half his face, saw this new source of hope as a threat to their reign of fear. They cornered him one evening as he was walking back to his hill. "We hear you're a miracle worker," Gyuki sneered, his dozen cronies fanning out to block any escape. "The people are starting to get soft. Hopeful. I don't like it. It's bad for business." Naruto stopped, his gaze unwavering. He didn't tense, didn't fall into a fighting stance. He just watched them, his calm a stark contrast to their swaggering aggression. "Your business is fear," he stated, his voice even and quiet, yet it carried over the wind. "Fear is a sickness. I heal sickness." Gyuki laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can heal us?" He cracked his knuckles. "We're going to break you, and then we're going to show everyone what happens to false gods in Zaraki." They charged. Naruto didn't move. The first thug swung a rusty pipe at his head. Naruto raised a hand, not to block, but to gently catch the man's wrist. A flicker of gold light, and the man screamed, dropping the pipe. He stared at his arm, which was now covered in blooming vines, tiny white flowers sprouting from his skin. They weren't hurting him, but the sheer, unnatural reality of it terrified him. The others hesitated. But Gyuki roared and charged forward, his fist radiating a crude, dense spiritual pressure. Naruto sidestepped the clumsy punch, his movement an exercise in pure economy. He placed 2 fingers on the back of Gyuki's neck. The golden energy flowed again, but this time it wasn't healing. It was clarifying. Gyuki froze mid-stride, his eyes widening in horror. He wasn't seeing Naruto anymore. He was seeing every soul he'd ever brutalized, every act of cruelty he'd ever committed. Not as a memory, but as a visceral, gut-wrenching experience. He felt their pain, their terror, their despair, all at once. It was a weight his soul couldn't bear. He collapsed, not unconscious, but catatonic, drooling and whimpering as the phantoms of his own making danced in his mind. The rest of the gang stared, paralyzed with a new kind of fear. This wasn't a warrior who had beaten their boss. This was something else entirely. Naruto looked at them, his blue eyes holding not anger, but a deep, profound pity. "Go," he said softly. "Find a new purpose." They fled, and never troubled the district again. From that day on, Naruto's role was solidified. He was no longer just a healer. He was a protector, an anchor of stability in a sea of chaos. It was this stability that was first to notice when things began to go wrong. It started subtly. A patch of ground on the outskirts of the district where nothing would grow. No matter how much of his energy he poured into it. Then, a family in a shack at the edge of Zaraki simply vanished. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no lingering spiritual signatures. Their home was just empty, silent, an unnatural silence that seemed to absorb all sound. A few days later, it happened again. Another family, gone. The patch of dead ground had grown larger. And the silence had spread with it. The people were terrified. This wasn't the work of thugs or beasts. This was a creeping, invisible dread. Naruto went to investigate the newest empty hovel. The air inside was cold, dead. It felt like a vacuum, sucking the life and warmth out of everything. He placed his hand on the wall, and instead of his power flowing out, He felt a tug, a faint but undeniable pull trying to draw the life out of him. He pulled his hand back, frowning. This was not an absence of life. It was an anti-life. A negation. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this was related to the force that had destroyed his own world. A different manifestation, perhaps, but the same fundamental truth. Oblivion. That evening, a Shinigami patrol arrived. 3 of them, clad in the standard black shihakusho, their faces etched with the casual arrogance of those who held authority over the disenfranchised souls of the Rukongai. They were from one of a lower squad, sent to investigate the spiritual disturbances that had finally registered on the Seraite's sensors. All right, you lot, the leader, a sour-faced man with a prominent scar on his chin, announced to the gathered fearful residents. We've had reports of soul disappearances. Anyone seen anything? Speak up. Don't waste our time. The residents exchanged nervous glances, their gazes flicking toward Naruto, who stood at the back of the small crowd, observing. No one spoke. Their trust in the Soul Reapers was non-existent. They were tax collectors and enforcers, not protectors. Nothing. Useless, the Shinigami scoffed. He gestured to the silent, dead zone. The spiritual density here has dropped to near zero. It's like a void. Whatever it is, it's probably some new type of hollow. Fan out. If you see anything, signal. They were fools. Naruto could feel it. This wasn't a hollow. A hollow was a predator, driven by hunger. This was a cancer, driven by nothing but the desire to spread. He followed them at a distance, a silent shadow. The 3 Shinigami moved with practiced, if uninspired, coordination. They scanned the area, their hands resting on the hilts of their zanpakuto. The silence deepened, pressing in on them. One of the younger Shinigami shivered. Feels wrong, doesn't it, Takada-san? He murmured. I can barely feel my own Retsu. It's just a dead zone. Takada, the leader, grunted, though his own eyes darted nervously. Probably drains spiritual energy. Just be ready. They found it in the center of the growing dead zone. It hovered a few feet above the ground. A shimmering distortion in the air, like heat haze off a blistering road. It was roughly humanoid in shape but had no discernible features. It was a silhouette cut out of reality itself. Inside its form, there was no light. No color. Only a flat, featureless black that seemed to drink the very twilight from the sky. The most unnerving part was the absolute lack of sound that emanated from it. It was a pocket of perfect, profound silence. What is that? The 3rd Shinigami breathed, his voice tight with fear. Doesn't matter, Takada said, drawing his sword. He was trying to sound confident, but a tremor betrayed him. It's an anomaly. Orders are to eliminate it. Bakudo number 4. Hanawa. A crackling rope of yellow energy shot from his hand and flew toward the creature. But it didn't connect. A foot from the silent form, the Kido spell simply unraveled. The energy dissipated into nothing, absorbed without a trace. The creature turned its featureless head toward them. It didn't have eyes, but they all felt its attention lock onto them. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature washed over them. It was the cold of absolute emptiness. Damn it. Go, Tenmaru, Takada yelled, releasing his shikai. His blade transformed into a wicked-looking scythe. He swung it, launching a crescent of spiritual energy at the creature. Like the Kido, the arc of energy flew true, only to dissolve into nothingness just before impact. The creature didn't block or dodge. It simply erased. The attack, and the energy that comprised it, ceased to exist. Takada gasped, staring at his zanpakuto. The spiritual light that normally coated the blade was visibly dimmer. The creature was feeding on their power. It drifted toward them, slow, inexorable. The youngest of the 3 panicked. He screamed and charged, his blade held high. Don't just stand there. He swung wildly. His blade passed through the shimmering form as if it were air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the boy's eyes widened in horror. He looked down at his zanpakuto. The steel was visibly corroding, turning to gray dust that flaked away in the wind. The corrosion spread up the blade, onto his hands, his arms. He didn't bleed. His flesh just flaked away, turning into the same lifeless dust, his screams swallowed by the creature's oppressive silence. In seconds, he was gone. Not even a pile of dust remained. There was just nothing. The other two were frozen in sheer terror. This was a monster they couldn't fight. A concept they couldn't comprehend. Attacking it was suicide. Fleeing felt just as hopeless as the creature. This echo of silence turned its attention to them. A figure stepped between them. Naruto moved with a silent grace that made the two battle-hardened Shinigami feel like clumsy children. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't radiate any detectable Retsu. He simply stood there, a bastion of calm, golden warmth against the encroaching, silent cold. "You've consumed enough," Naruto said, his voice quiet but resonant. It was the first sound to pierce the creature's silencing aura, and it made the air itself seem to vibrate. The echo paused, its attention shifting entirely to him. It seemed to recognize something in him. A challenge. An opposite. It drifted forward, one of its silent, indistinct limbs reaching for him. The two remaining Shinigami scrambled backward, their training screaming at them to run. But their legs wouldn't obey. They couldn't look away. Naruto didn't retreat. He met the appendage with his own hand. The moment his skin made contact with the distortion, there was no explosion. No flash of light. There was just a silent contest of wills. The echo tried to pull the life from him, to unmake him as it had the other Shinigami. It was like a black hole trying to swallow a star. But the star did not yield. Naruto closed his eyes, his focus turning inward to that boundless, golden ocean. He wasn't pushing back with brute force. That was not the nature of his power. He was listening, searching. He reached into the creature's non-existence, past the silence, past the void. And he found it. A single, infinitesimally small thread. The sliver of stolen energy. The spark of warped existence that held its form together. Its connection to the world, however parasitic. His grip on that thread was absolute. He didn't pour power into it. He didn't try to purify it. He just let go. He severed its connection. Plucked the thread from the tapestry of reality. The effect was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. The echo of silence shuddered. The shimmering distortion around its form began to fray at the edges. The deep, absolute black at its core started to unravel, not violently, but like a sweater coming undone. It didn't scream or roar. It simply unwound, its form dissolving thread by thread into the twilight air, leaving absolutely nothing behind. The oppressive silence lifted, and the normal sounds of the wind rushing through the desolate district returned. Sounding like a symphony to the two terrified soul reapers. They stared at the spot where the monster had been, then at Naruto, their mouths agape. They hadn't felt a single spike of spiritual pressure. There was no Kido chant, no Shikai release. The man had just touched it, and it had ceased to be. It wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of negation, a power so fundame. NTAL and absolute that they had no frame of reference for it. Naruto turned his serene blue eyes on them. "It's over. You should go." Takada finally found his voice, stammering. Who? What are you? A resident, Naruto replied simply. Before turning and walking away, his white tunic unruffled, his calm demeanor unbroken. Far away, within the fortified walls of the Seraite, alarms blared. In the sleek, sterile headquarters of the 12th Division, scientists and researchers scrambled in a panic. Every spiritual energy sensor trained on the outer districts had just gone haywire. "Captain Kuretsuchi," a frantic subordinate called out, pointing to a large central monitor. "Look at this. The 80th district, Zaraki." Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi, his face a painted mask of grotesque curiosity, stalked over to the screen. "What is it, Akon? Don't waste my time with some gargantuan hollow. I'm in the middle of a fascinating dissection." "No, sir. It's the opposite," Akon said, his finger tracing a line on the graph. 5 minutes ago, we registered a spiritual dead zone, a total vacuum, expanding rapidly. We dispatched the patrol as per protocol. Then, this. He pointed to a single, vertical spike on the graph. It wasn't a spike of Retsu, which was typically measured in jagged, chaotic waves. This was a perfectly smooth, impossibly sharp line of pure, unidentifiable energy. It flared for a single, brilliant instant and then vanished. In its wake, the spiritual vacuum in Zaraki was gone. The ambient spiritual particles in the atmosphere were not just restored, they were more vibrant, more stable than before. "What kind of energy is that?" Mayuri hissed, his golden eyes narrowing with a predator's intensity. It doesn't match any known Kido, Hollow, or Zanpakuto signature. It's structured, ordered. It looks less like an energy reading and more like a law of physics being written. The disturbance was too great, too unique, to be ignored. The report shot up the chain of command with unprecedented speed. In the cavernous assembly hall of the 1st Division, Head Captain Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto stood before a gathering of his captains, the report projected by Kido before them. The hall was silent. The assembled leaders of the Gote 13 processing the bizarre data. A spiritual entity erased without a trace. Captain Shunsui Kyoraku mused, tipping his straw hat down. Quote, and the Shinigami who made contact was unmade. That's not something a hollow does. It's a conceptual attack, Sosuke Aizen added, his voice calm and analytical, his glasses catching the light. A being that doesn't destroy, but simply negates. More alarming, however, is the force that stopped it. An energy signature we cannot classify, wielded by an unknown individual in the Rukongai. A threat, Captain Soi Fan of the 2nd Division stated flatly. Unidentified, unregistered, and possessing immense power. The Onmitsukido should be dispatched to capture or eliminate them immediately. Yamamoto stroked his long white beard. His ancient eyes closed in thought. An unknown power of this magnitude appearing suddenly, it was a variable he did not appreciate. Brute force was an option, but a clumsy one. This required a delicate touch. A precise instrument. His eyes opened, sweeping over his assembled captains. They settled on the serene, ever-smiling captain of the 4th Division. She stood with perfect grace. Her hands tucked into the sleeves of her haori, her presence a pool of tranquility in the room of hardened warriors. But Yamamoto, older than them all, knew the truth of the steel that lay beneath that placid surface. He knew the legacy of the name, Kenpachi. This is not a matter for assassins, Captain Soi Fan, Yamamoto's voice boomed, silencing all discussion. This is a matter for investigation. We need to understand the nature of this individual and their power. We need to know if they are a threat, or perhaps, something else. He looked directly at the captain of the 4th Division. Captain Unohana, you will go to the 80th district. Take whomever you need. Approach this individual. Ascertain their nature. Do not engage in hostilities unless absolutely necessary. His gaze was hard. I want answers. Retsu Unohana bowed her head, her long, black braids swaying gently. As you command, head captain, she said, her voice as smooth and calming as a gentle stream. But behind her serene smile, her mind was already racing. An energy that felt like life itself, potent enough to erase a being of pure negation. For the first time in centuries, a genuine, thrilling SP. Arc of curiosity ignited within the heart of the Soul Society's greatest healer. A puzzle she couldn't immediately solve. A power she couldn't instantly comprehend. It was utterly fascinating. Back on his hill overlooking Zaraki, Naruto sat cross-legged, his eyes closed. He could feel the world around him with a clarity he'd never had before. He felt the weary souls in the district below, the thrum of the Seraite in the distance. A fortress of spiritual power. And he felt a new presence approaching. It was a single signature, but it felt as deep and vast as the ocean. On the surface, it was calm, gentle. A vast reservoir of healing energy that was almost comforting. But beneath that serene surface, there was something else. A slumbering volcano of immense, terrifying power. A killing int. And so profound and perfectly controlled that it had become a part of the very fabric of her soul. It was a beautiful, terrifying paradox. Life and death, woven together into a single, elegant being. He opened his eyes as she came into view, walking up the hill with a grace that made her seem to float over the dry grass. She wore the white haori of a captain over her standard uniform, her expression a mask of gentle pleasantry. The setting twilight of the Soul Society silhouetted her, making her seem like a spirit of the dusk. She stopped 20 feet from him, her smile never faltering. Good evening, Retsu Unohana said, her voice carrying the same gentle authority he had sensed in her spiritual pressure. The Gote 13 has registered a most unusual event in this district. An event that seems to center around you. She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes filled with an unnerving, analytical intelligence. I am Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division. And you are. Naruto looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the healer. He saw the killer. He saw the centuries of weariness and control that held it all together. He saw a soul as complex and powerful as any he had ever known. He rose to his feet. The grass around him greening at his presence. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he replied, his voice calm and clear. And I believe we have much to discuss. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Dance of Life and Death. The name settled in the air between them, familiar and yet utterly alien in this world. Naruto Uzumaki. Retsu Unohana tasted the syllables, her mind a flawless archive of the Soul Society's history. Finding no record, no echo of such a person. He was a blank slate, a man who stood before her radiating an energy purer than any she had ever encountered, yet possessed no discernible Retsu. It was a contradiction that made the healer in her curious and the killer in her thrill. It is a name I do not know, she said, her smile unwavering, a placid mask for the storm of analysis happening behind her eyes. And yet, the energy that erased the entity moments ago, it came from you. It was not Kido. It was not the power of a Zanpakuto. Tell me, Naruto Uzumaki, what is it that you are? Naruto watched her, his own gaze just as penetrating. He could feel the question beneath the question. She wasn't just asking for information. She was probing, testing the edge of his power with her own immense spiritual pressure, a gentle but insistent wave of energy that would have brought a lesser soul to its knees. It washed over him, finding nothing to push against. Flowing around him as if he were a stone in a river. I am a survivor, he answered, his voice devoid of self-pity. It was a simple statement of fact. Of a world that no longer exists. The admission should have been shocking. But Unohana's smile only tightened by a fraction. It explained the impossible. The anomaly. A fascinating claim, she said, taking a single, deliberate step forward. The air grew heavy. The gentle pressure intensifying into something sharp and suffocating. The very grass at her feet seemed to wither, not from her power, but from the sheer, focused intent that was beginning to bleed from her. The head captain has sent me to ascertain your nature. To determine if you are a threat. Are you here to talk, or to fight? Naruto asked, his own stance not changing, yet a profound stillness settled over him. He was no longer a being of passive warmth. He was the eye of a hurricane. Unohana's smile finally bloomed into something genuine, something that held a chilling, exhilarating beauty. Is there a difference? And then it came. It was not a wave of energy or a sudden movement. It was a feeling. A pressure on the soul so absolute, so refined, that it felt like the world had been plunged into the deepest, coldest part of the ocean. It was pure, undiluted killing intent, honed over 1,000 years of slaughter, now focused entirely on him. It was a promise of 1,000 different, exquisitely painful deaths, delivered with the precision of a master surgeon. The air itself seemed to thin, the twilight sky darkening as if in fear. Any other being, captain, Espada, Hollow, would have reacted. They would have drawn their weapon, raised their guard, or been crushed by the sheer weight of it. Naruto did none of these things. He simply stood, a beacon of calm, unwavering life in the face of absolute death. The killing intent washed against him and broke, like waves against a cliff. It could not find purchase. Fear was a product of the instinct to survive, and he was life itself. How could life fear death? It was merely its other half. His lack of reaction was, to Unohana, more of a response than any counterattack could ever be. It was an outright denial of her most fundamental power. And it was intoxicating. I see, she whispered, the sound a silken threat. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, she moved. There was no flicker, no shunpo crackle in the air. One moment she was 20 feet away, the next she was upon him, the pale glint of her Zanpakuto already tracing a line for his throat. The blade was a whisper of steel, its path a haiku of lethal grace. It was the most beautiful and deadly strike he had ever witnessed. Naruto's movement was just as sudden but entirely different in nature. He didn't meet her speed with speed of his own. He simply yielded. He swayed backward, his body bending at an impossible angle, the razor edge of her blade missing his neck by the width of a hair. The movement was not born of training or discipline, but of pure instinct. Like a reed bending in a gale. Her attack didn't stop. The thrust became a fluid, horizontal slash aimed at his midsection. Naruto brought his hand up, his palm open. Golden light, vibrant and warm. coalesced in front of his hand, forming a small, shimmering shield no larger than a dinner plate. Unohana's blade struck it, and the sound was not the clang of steel on steel, but the chime of a temple bell. The force of her blow, enough to cleave a lesser captain in two, simply vanished into the shield, absorbed and neutralized without a trace. She flowed back, her feet barely touching the ground, putting distance between them once more. Her eyes, narrowed now, held a dangerous gleam. You don't fight back. There is nothing to fight, Naruto replied, the golden shield dissolving into motes of light. You are not my enemy. You're just curious. Curiosity is a luxury, she countered, her blade now held in a two-handed grip. The pressure in the air doubled. In the Soul Society, the unknown is a threat until it is proven otherwise. And threats must be measured. She came at him again, but this time it was no single, elegant strike. It was a storm. Her blade was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of silver death that left shimmering afterimages in the air. She moved around him in a blur, each step perfectly placed, each slash aimed at a vital point. It was the pinnacle of Zanjutsu. A level of swordsmanship that was less a skill and more a form of art. Naruto was at the center of that storm, a pillar of unwavering calm. He didn't try to match her frantic pace. His movements were minimalist, efficient, and utterly profound. A sidestep here, a gentle parry with a flicker of golden energy there. He wove through the tapestry of her attacks, never breaking his own serene rhythm. He wasn't dodging so much as he was allowing her attacks to pass through the space he had just occupied. It was a dance, and he was letting her lead, his only role to ensure that her steps, however deadly, never landed. With each blocked or evaded strike, Unohana's frustration grew. It was a cold, thrilling frustration she hadn't felt in centuries. He wasn't overpowering her. He wasn't outskilling her. He was simply incompatible with her violence. It was like trying to stab the ocean. Her blade, which had ended countless lives and decided the fates of battles, was rendered meaningless. Why won't you draw your weapon? She demanded, her voice tight, as she disengaged again, her chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm. Do you mock me? This is my weapon, Naruto said, holding up his open hand, a soft, golden light pulsing gently in his palm. And I have no desire to use it on you. You will, she hissed, and this time, when she moved, the very air began to scream. She was no longer just using swordsmanship. She was beginning to channel her true power into her strikes. A faint, blood-red aura now coated her blade, and the ground cracked beneath her feet with every step. This was no longer a test. This was a demand for him to show his true self. She lunged, the red-tinged blade aimed directly at his heart. The strike was faster than anything before it. A streak of light that bent space. This time, Naruto knew he couldn't simply evade. He met the attack head-on. He clapped his hands together, and a torrent of golden life energy erupted from him. It didn't form a shield, but a dense, swirling vortex that met her charge. The impact was immense. Not an explosion of sound, but a deafening lack of it, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The red aura of her blade warred against the golden vortex of his life energy. It was a perfect, visual representation of their two natures, a needlepoint of absolute, focused death trying to pierce a boundless ocean of creation. For a moment, they were locked in a stalemate. Unohana's eyes widened. She could feel it. He wasn't just blocking her. He was healing the damage she was trying to inflict on reality itself. Her power was a scalpel, designed to cut the threads of existence. His was a loom, weaving them back together as fast as she could sever them. With a roar that was utterly at odds with her placid appearance, she poured more of herself into the strike. The red aura flared, and her blade began to inch forward, pushing through the golden vortex. She would have her answer. She would force him to bleed. The tip of her Zanpakuto broke through his defense. Naruto's eyes widened slightly, not in pain, but in surprise at the sheer, unyielding force of her will. The blade, sharp enough to split a soul, sliced through his tunic and bit deep into the flesh of his shoulder. It was a definitive blow. A clean, perfect cut that should have disabled his arm and sent him reeling. Unohana felt the familiar, satisfying feedback of blade parting flesh. She had won this exchange. But her victory was fleeting. The moment her blade made the cut, before a single drop of blood could fall. The wound began to close. A brilliant golden light shone from the injury, stitching flesh, muscle, and skin back together at an impossible rate. By the time she had pulled her blade back, the wound was gone. Not a scar, not a mark, not even a tear in his tunic remained. It was as if the attack had never happened. Unohana froze, her breath catching in her throat. She stared at his shoulder, then at her blade. Then back at him. Healing Kido, even her own, the most advanced in the Soul Society, required time, chance, concentration. It could mend wounds, but it could not reverse them in an instant. What he had just done was not healing. It was regeneration on a conceptual level. It was a flat refusal to accept the reality of being wounded. The fight was over. She knew it. He knew it. You cannot kill a man who will not die. The immense killing intent that had saturated the hilltop vanished as if it had never been, replaced by a silence that was deeper and more profound than the one left by the echo. Unohana lowered her sword, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, awe, and an emotion she hadn't let herself feel in a very, very long time: utter, complete fascination. Naruto didn't press his advantage. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a strange, sad understanding. He saw the flicker of disappointment in her gaze, the longing of a true warrior who had, for a fleeting moment, hoped to have found an equal, only to find an unsolvable riddle instead. He saw the loneliness of the unmatched, something he understood all too well. He took a slow step toward her. She didn't move, her guard completely down for the first time. He stopped just before her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. He looked not at her eyes, but just below her throat. At her collarbone. There, almost invisible against her pale skin, was a scar. It was thin and white, impossibly old, a remnant of a battle fought in a forgotten age. It was a flaw in the otherwise perfect canvas of her being, a mark that even her own mastery over healing could not erase. A symbol of her past, of the Kenpachi she had been. You carry a heavy burden, he said softly. He raised his hand, his fingers glowing with that same gentle, golden light. Unohana watched, mesmerized, as he reached out and gently touched the scar. His touch was warm, comforting. The light flowed from his fingertips into her skin. It didn't burn or sting. It felt like coming home. She watched in stunned disbelief as the ancient, white line of the scar began to fade. The damaged soul tissue, a permanent record of a near-fatal blow from a long-dead foe, was being rewritten. Unmade. The skin smoothed over, leaving behind no trace that the wound had ever existed. He had not just healed a scar. He had erased a piece of her history, a part of the weight she carried every single day. An act of impossible, intimate restoration. He pulled his hand back, the golden light fading. He met her gaze. And for the first time, she saw the true depth of his power. It wasn't the power to fight or to destroy. It was the power to create. To restore. To grant a peace that she had long since believed was impossible. Retsu Unohana, the first Kenpachi, the woman known as Yakiru, the deadliest killer the Soul Society had ever produced, found herself utterly and completely disarmed. Not by a blade, not by a fist, but by an act of impossible kindness. She slowly, reverently, sheathed her zanpakuto. The click of the blade locking into its scabbard was the only sound on the silent hilltop. Her serene, practiced smile was gone, replaced by an expression of raw, genuine wonder. Naruto Uzumaki, she said, her voice barely a whisper, imbued with a new, profound respect. The head captain ordered me to determine if you are a threat. She paused, her dark eyes searching his. I believe you may be the most dangerous thing to have entered the Soul Society in 1,000 years. But not for the reasons he fears. Her smile returned, but it was different now. It was no longer a mask. It was real. You will come with me to the Seraite, she stated. It was not a request, nor was it an order. It was an invitation. An invitation to a new, far more interesting dance that was only just beginning. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Gilded Cage. The walk from the windswept hill in Zaraki to the gates of the Seraite was a journey between worlds. With Unohana at his side, the very atmosphere seemed to part for them. The downtrodden, hopeless souls of the 80th district, who would norm. Ally scatter or stare with sullen resentment at the sight of a Shinigami captain, merely watched in silent awe. They saw their Kogan-sama walking alongside this powerful woman not as a prisoner, but as an equal. It was a sight that planted a seed of impossible hope in the barren soil of their existence. As they drew closer to the shimmering barrier that separated the Rukongai from the fortress of the Soul Reapers, Naruto felt the change. The spiritual energy in the air grew exponentially denser, cleaner, and more ordered. It was no longer a wild, untamed river but a meticulously engineered canal system, flowing with purpose and power. The air hummed with it, a constant, low-frequency vibration that spoke of immense, contained strength. You feel it, Unohana noted, not as a question, but a statement. Her gaze was fixed forward. But her attention was entirely on him. It's loud, Naruto replied, his voice calm. For him, sensing this energy was like hearing a symphony. Zaraki had been a place of muted, discordant notes. This was a grand orchestra, with every instrument tuned and playing in concert. Organized. Controlled. Every soul here is a part of the whole. That is the purpose of the Gote 13, she said. To bring order to the chaos of souls. To protect the balance. He looked at the massive, white walls that rose to pierce the twilight sky, at the towering gate guarded by a giant of a man who didn't even stir as they approached. Balance requires more than just high walls and sharp swords, he murmured, more to himself than to her. The giant gatekeeper, Jidanbo, gave them a respectful nod as Unohana passed. His eyes lingering on Naruto with open curiosity. The moment they stepped through the gate and into the Seraite proper, the difference was absolute. The dirt paths of the Rukongai gave way to clean, white stone streets. The ramshackle huts were replaced by elegant, sprawling compounds with tiled roofs and manicured gardens. The air was filled with the Kree-sp crackle of Shunpo as Shinigami moved about their duties, their faces disciplined and purposeful. But beneath the serene order, Naruto felt the undercurrents. He felt the rigid hierarchy, the ancient traditions that felt more like shackles than foundations. He felt the weight of 1,000 years of law pressing down on every soul within these walls. It was a beautiful, functional, and deeply oppressive place. A gilded cage. Their destination was the monolithic tower at the very center of the Seraite, the headquarters of the 1st Division. As they walked, the gazes of other Shinigami fell upon them. Naruto saw the confusion, the suspicion, and in some, the outright hostility in their eyes. He was an outsider, a Ryoka, walking freely beside a captain. It was a violation of their established order. He met their stares without aggression, his calm, blue eyes simply acknowledging them, an act that seemed to unnerve them more than any threat could. They arrived at the entrance to the 1st Division barracks, a place of stark, intimidating simplicity. The spiritual pressure here was a physical force, a crushing weight designed to intimidate and subdue. It was the concentrated presence of the most powerful being in the Soul Society, Genryusai Yamamoto. Unohana seemed untroubled by it, but Naruto noticed the subtle tensing of her shoulders, a subconscious act of bracing. He, however, felt it only as a point of immense heat. Like standing near a forge. It was powerful, but it was not his element. It could not burn him. They were led into the vast assembly hall. Lined up in 2 rows. Facing a raised platform were 12 other figures, all clad in the white howry of a captain. The combined spiritual pressure of the 13 captains was staggering, a sea of conflicting energies and wills that would have vaporized an ordinary soul. At the head of it all, seated on the platform, was head captain Yamamoto. His ancient, wizened form belied the cataclysmic power simmering just beneath his skin. His eyes were closed, but Naruto felt his attention like a physical touch. Captain Unohana, Yamamoto's voice boomed, echoing in the cavernous hall. You have returned. Present the anomaly. Unohana stepped forward, bowing respectfully. Head captain. I present Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto stepped forward to stand beside her, offering no bow, only a steady, respectful gaze. A murmur rippled through the assembled captains. His lack of deference was a blatant challenge to their authority. Insolent whelp, a small, lithe captain with dark skin and a cold expression hissed. Captain Soi Fan of the 2nd Division. You will show the head captain the proper respect. Before Naruto could respond, Unohana spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. He is not of the Soul Society. Our customs are not his. Her defense was simple, factual, and held an implicit warning. Yamamoto opened one eye, a sliver of molten gold that pinned Naruto in place. We are aware of your unconventional nature. The patrol you encountered reported that you, unmade, a hostile entity. Explain this power. Naruto met the old man's gaze without flinching. What you call a hostile entity, I call an echo of silence. They are not creatures to be fought. They are wounds in the world. They don't destroy, they negate. They unmake whatever they touch. I did not destroy it. I healed the wound. Healed it. A towering, monstrously scarred man with bells in his hair guffawed. The current Kenpachi, Zaraki. His grin was a slash of predatory delight. You don't look like much of a healer. You don't look like much of anything. I can't feel a lick of power from you. Are you sure you're not just some kind of trick, Retsu? Unohana's smile became dangerously serene. He is no trick, Kenpachi. His power is simply beyond your comprehension. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Zaraki's grin widened, his gaze now fixed on Naruto with a newfound, hungry intensity. The idea of something Unohana respected, that he couldn't understand, was the most interesting thing he'd heard all day. A fascinating distinction, a calm, intellectual voice interjected. Captain Sosuke Aizen of the 5th Division stepped forward slightly, adjusting his glasses. His smile was pleasant, his demeanor disarming. You say you heal these wounds. Could it be that your power is one of creation, to counteract their negation? His question was perfectly framed. Seemingly helpful, but Naruto sensed the razor-sharp intellect behind it, probing for the exact nature of his abilities. You could call it that, Naruto conceded, his eyes locking with Aizen's. He felt a profound sense of caution. This man was more dangerous than the scarred brawler or the stern head captain. His power was not just in his sword, but in his words. Life is the counter to nothingness. I am aligned with life. An alignment that allowed you to effortlessly regenerate from a direct strike from my blade, Unohana added, her voice echoing with quiet authority. That statement sent a new shockwave through the room. The captain stared at her, then at Naruto, with renewed disbelief. Unohana was not one for hyperbole. For her to admit to landing a clean strike, only for it to be rendered meaningless, was a testament to a power they couldn't begin to measure. Impossible, Soi Fan snapped. No being can regenerate instantaneously without a cost. What is the source of your power? Are you a wizard? An experiment of Urahara's? A new form of Bount? I am none of those things, Naruto said, his patience beginning to wear thin. I told your captain. I am the survivor of another world. A world that was consumed by the very same force that has sent these echoes here. My world is gone. I am all that is left of it. This threat you are facing now is only the beginning. It will not stop with the outer districts of the Rukongai. It will come for this place. It will come for all worlds. It doesn't want to conquer you. It wants to erase you. His words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. He spoke with the absolute certainty of a witness. This was no longer an interrogation of an anomaly, it was a warning of an apocalypse. And we are to take the word of an unverified outsider. Captain Byakuya Kuchiki of the 6th Division spoke for the first time, his voice as cold and elegant as sculpted ice. The laws of the Soul Society are absolute. You are an unregistered entity of immense power. By law, you should be imprisoned or executed. Your laws are for the souls that belong to this cycle of life and death, Naruto countered, his voice rising with a quiet fire that commanded attention. I am outside that cycle. Your laws do not apply to me. And while you stand here debating rules and regulations, the cancer that destroyed my home is taking root in yours. You can treat me as an enemy, and I will leave you to your fate. Or you can accept me as an ally, and I will help you fight for your future. The choice is yours. But make it quickly. Time is a luxury you no longer have. The sheer audacity of his ultimatum stunned the hall into silence. He had not pleaded, not negotiated. He had laid down terms to the 13 most powerful warriors in the afterlife. Yamamoto's visible eye narrowed. The spiritual pressure in the room intensified tenfold, the very air crackling with heat. You are in no position to make demands, boy. You are one. We are 13. And you are all blind. Naruto shot back, his gaze sweeping over all of them. You measure power in Ryutsu, in the sharpness of a blade, in the force of an explosion. The enemy you face has no Ryutsu. It cannot be cut. It cannot be blown apart. Your entire arsenal, your centuries of training and tradition, are useless against an enemy that can simply unmake you. I am the only one here who understands it. The only one who can fight it. So, you tell me, head captain. Who is truly in the position to make demands? For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Yamamoto stared at him. The ancient captain's mind weighing 1,000 years of experience against the impossible truth of this stranger's words. He had the reports. He had Unohana's testimony. He had the raw, unshakable confidence of the man standing before him. To admit he was right was to admit the Gote 13 was facing a threat it was not equipped to handle. To deny him was to risk annihilation. It was Aizen who broke the stalemate. Head captain, he said, his voice a model of reason and calm. Perhaps a compromise is in order. Uzumaki-san's claims are extraordinary, but the evidence of this new threat is undeniable. To treat him as an enemy would be unwise. To grant him full autonomy, however, would be a security risk. He has demonstrated a power we do not understand, but it appears to be fundamentally based in life and restoration. Aizen turned his pleasant smile toward Naruto, then back to Yamamoto. Captain Unohana is our foremost expert in the healing arts, and she has already engaged with him directly. I propose that Naruto Uzumaki be granted a special, provisional status. He will reside within the Seraite, where we can ensure he is not a threat, under the direct observation and custody of the 4th Division. This will allow Captain Unohana to study his abilities, while giving us a weapon against these echoes, should they appear again. A cage, perhaps, but a comfortable one. A gilded one. The proposal was brilliant in its simplicity. It satisfied the security concerns of Soifan and Byakuya, placated Yamamoto's need for control, and crucially, kept Naruto within Aizen's reach. It was a perfect political solution. Yamamoto considered it, his gaze shifting from Aizen to Unohana, and finally back to Naruto. And you, Naruto Uzumaki. Would you accept these terms? To be a guest of the 4th Division. Under the watchful eye of Captain Unohana. Naruto looked at Unohana. Her serene expression was unreadable, but he could feel her curiosity, a powerful, magnetic force. Being near her was interesting. And being within the Seraite would give him a base of operations from which to monitor the spread of the silence. It was a cage, as Aizen had so aptly put it, but for now, it was a convenient one. I accept, Naruto said. On one condition. Yamamoto's eye twitched with irritation. You dare. The people of the 80th district, Naruto said, his voice firm. They are unprotected. They were the first victims. I want regular patrols from the Gote 13 stationed there, and a steady supply of provisions sent from the Seraite. You want my help protecting your world. And you will start by protecting its most vulnerable. This final demand was the master stroke. It was not a request for himself, but an altruistic demand for others. To refuse it would be to show the Gote 13's callous disregard for the souls they were sworn to protect. It was a moral checkmate. Yamamoto stared at him for a long, hard moment, then slammed the butt of his cane sword on the floor. The sound cracked like thunder. Very well. Your terms are accepted. Captain Unohana, he is your responsibility. Do not fail me. He closed his eye. This council is dismissed. The captains began to file out, some casting lingering, hostile glances at Naruto, others looking thoughtful. Kenpachi Zaraki gave him a wide, bloody grin and a thumbs up before lumbering out. Aizen paused as he passed, his smile never wavering. Welcome to the Seraite, Naruto Uzumaki. I have a feeling you will make things very interesting. Then he was gone, a whisper of black cloth and polite menace. Soon, only Naruto and Unohana remained in the vast, empty hall. The crushing weight of the captain's combined presence was gone, leaving a strange quiet in its wake. You play the political game better than I anticipated, Unohana said. A note of genuine admiration in her voice. You cornered them. It wasn't a game, Naruto replied, turning to her. I don't make deals for the lives of others. It was a simple truth. A world that doesn't protect its weakest doesn't deserve to be saved. She studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. Come. I will show you to your new quarters. The 4th Division is a place of healing. You should feel at home there. The 4th Division barracks was a stark contrast to the rest of the Seraite. It was less a military installation and more a sprawling, serene hospital complex. The air was calm, filled with the gentle hum of healing keto and the scent of medicinal herbs. Shinigami of the 4th Division moved with a quiet, efficient grace, their focus on mending, not fighting. Unohana led him to a private, spacious room in the captain's personal wing. It had a comfortable bed, a small desk, and a sliding door that opened onto a beautiful, meticulously kept rock garden. It was peaceful, isolated, the perfect cage. You will be comfortable here, she said, standing by the open door, the twilight casting long shadows across the garden. You will have freedom of movement within the 4th Division grounds. But you are not to leave without my permission or an escort. Is that understood? Perfectly, Naruto said, walking past her to look out at the garden. The sand was raked into perfect, wave-like patterns around dark, silent stones. It was beautiful, but sterile. Lifeless. He knelt down, placing his palm on the raked sand. A soft, golden glow emanated from his hand. Unohana watched, intrigued, as a patch of vibrant green moss spread out from his hand, covering one of the barren rocks in a lush, velvet carpet. Then, a single, perfect white flower, of a species she had never seen, grew from the moss. Its petals unfurling to face him. He had, in an instant, introduced new life into this sterile, balanced garden. An act of casual, beautiful rebellion. He stood up and turned to face her. Thank you for speaking for me in there. I merely reported what I saw, she deflected, though her eyes were fixed on the impossible flower. It was your own words that won the day. A comfortable silence fell between them, the first they had shared that wasn't filled with the tension of a fight or the pressure of a political confrontation. It was something new. That scar I healed, Naruto said. His voice softer now. It was very old. Who gave it to you? The question was direct, personal, and something no one in the Soul Society would have dared to ask her. Unohana. Na's placid smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She turned her gaze from the flower to him, her dark eyes unreadable. She didn't answer immediately, her mind flashing back to a bloody field, a boy with wild eyes and a sword. And the first and only thrill of a true battle for her life. That, she said, her voice a low murmur, is a story for another time. She met his gaze, and he saw a flicker of the warrior, the Kenpachi. Deep within her eyes. For now, Naruto Uzumaki, you should rest. Your new life in the Soul Society begins now. She turned and left, her footsteps silent, leaving him alone with the impossible flower in the garden of his gilded cage. He knew, and he sensed she knew as well, that Aizen had been wrong. This wasn't just a cage to contain him. It was a crucible, designed to test them both. And the heat was just beginning to rise. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Silent Plague. Life in the 4th Division was an exercise in quiet discipline. For Naruto, who had spent his life in the chaotic, boisterous world of shinobi, the serene, ordered calm was both a balm and a strange confinement. He spent his first few days observing, learning the rhythms of this place dedica. Ted to mending what the rest of the Seraite was designed to break. He watched the medics perform their healing keto, their hands glowing with a soft green light as they chanted precise, complex incantations. It was a fascinating process. But to him, it felt like trying to build a ship in a bottle with chopsticks. They were manipulating spiritual energy, coaxing it to repair damage. They were technicians. His own power was different. He didn't coax. He commanded. Life was not a force to be negotiated with, it was a fundamental truth, and his very being was an extension of it. He often sat in the garden, by the single, impossible white flower he had created. It did not wilt. It did not fade. It simply was, a perfect, unchanging testament to his nature. It was here that Unohana's lieutenant, Aizen Katetsu, found him one afternoon. The towering, silver-haired woman approached with a hesitant deference that seemed at odds with her rank. Uzumaki-san, she began, her voice soft. Captain Unohana requested I check on you. To see if you require anything. Naruto opened his eyes, turning his head to offer her a small smile. I'm fine, Katetsu-san. Just listening. Aizen blinked, her expression one of polite confusion. Listening. To what? It's very quiet here. To the life, he explained, gesturing to the meticulously maintained plants. The flow of energy through the soil. The souls of your patients. Most of them are afraid. Pain and fear, they leave a cold residue. It disrupts the natural flow of things. He paused, his blue eyes becoming distant for a moment. It makes healing more difficult than it needs to be. Azane was taken aback. She and her division worked with the tangible, torn flesh, fractured souls, depleted Retsu. The idea of sensing the emotional residue of a wound as a tangible force was a concept entirely foreign to her. I don't understand. Instead of explaining further, Naruto stood and walked toward the main infirmary building, Azane following in his wake. He stopped by the bed of a young, unseated officer who had been brought in a day earlier, his arm mangled by a hollow in the world of the living. The medics had done their job. The wound was closed, the Retsu stabilized. But the man was pale, sweating, caught in the grip of a feverish nightmare, his spiritual energy coiling tightly around him like a frightened snake. His body is healing, Naruto said quietly. His gaze fixed on the troubled Shinigami. But his soul remembers the terror. It is rejecting the repaired vessel. He reached out, placing his hand not on the wound, but on the man's forehead. A gentle, golden light, as soft as candlelight, flowed from his palm. There was no chant, no surge of power. It was just a warm, peaceful radiance that sank into the man's being. Azane watched, mesmerized, as the tension in the patient's body visibly melted away. His frantic breathing slowed to a deep, even rhythm. The fear sent in his Retsu, a sharp, acrid tang that all experienced medics could recognize, simply vanished, replaced by a profound calm. The man's eyes fluttered open, no longer wide with phantom terror, but clear and lucid. He looked at Naruto, a flicker of grateful confusion in his gaze. Before succumbing to a deep, peaceful sleep. How? Azane whispered, her medical knowledge utterly useless in the face of what she had just witnessed. I didn't heal his arm, Naruto said, pulling his hand back. You already did that. I just reminded his soul that it was safe to live again. Before Azane could ask another question, the world erupted. A piercing, jarring siren wailed through the Seraite, a sound of absolute emergency that sent a jolt of adrenaline through every Shinigami. It was the general alarm, a sound reserved for a full-scale invasion. Azane's head snapped up, her professional demeanor instantly taking over. She drew the small communication device from her uniform. This is Lieutenant Katetsu. Report. A frantic, static-laced voice crackled back. Multiple spiritual anomalies detected. Sector 3 North, the Tenkan District. It's the residential area for unseated officers and their families. Oh God, we have mass soul disappearances. It's them. The silent ones. Quote. Naruto's calm expression hardened into one of cold, focused resolve. He turned to Azane, his voice cutting through her shock. Where is your captain? She's already on her way. A voice answered from the doorway. Retsu Unohana stood there, no longer in her captain's haori, but in her standard shihakusho, the hilt of her zanpakuto visible over her shoulder. Her serene smile was gone, replaced by an expression of grim determination that transformed her from a gentle healer into a harbinger of war. The entire 4th Division is mobilizing. We are the primary response unit. She looked directly at Naruto, her gaze intense. Aizen's gilded cage has just become a battlefield. Are you with us? They are targeting the innocent, Naruto stated, a dangerous light entering his eyes. It was a cold fury, born from the memory of his own lost world. They are targeting families. I am with you. The scene at the Tenkan district was one of pure, unadulterated chaos. It was a sprawling area of modest but well-kept homes, a place where off-duty Shinigami lived with their families. Now, it was a war zone. At least a dozen echoes of silence drifted through the streets. Their featureless black forms a terrifying tear in the fabric of reality. Pockets of unnatural silence expanded around them, swallowing the screams of their victims. Squads from the 3rd and 5th divisions were already on the scene. But they were in disarray. Their swords passed uselessly through the creatures. Their Kido spells dissolved before making contact. They were warriors trying to fight a plague. Lieutenants shouted contradictory orders, their confidence shattering against an enemy that did not bleed, did not feel, and did not die. A young Shinigami charged one of the echoes, on Lee to be enveloped by its shimmering aura. He didn't scream. He simply ceased to be, his sword clattering to the ground where he had stood moments before. Panic was beginning to set in. This was not a battle. It was a harvest. Then, the 4th Division arrived. They did not come as a vanguard of warriors, but as a wave of healers and support specialists. They fanned out with disciplined precision, air green healing Keto flaring to life as they began pulling the injured and terrified civilians out of the line of fire, erecting defensive barriers, and establishing triage centers. At their head stood Unohana, Naruto at her side. She surveyed the scene, her gaze taking in the tactical situation with the cold, practiced eye of a master strategist. They are stronger than the one from Zaraki, she noted. Her voice low and steady amidst the chaos. And they are coordinated. This is an attack, not a random incursion. Their silence is a weapon, Naruto observed, his own senses stretching out across the battlefield. He could feel the life energy of hundreds of souls being snuffed out, erased from existence. It inspires terror and erodes the will to fight. Then we will not give them silence, Unohana declared. She turned to her division. All members, establish a perimeter. Lieutenant Katetsu, coordinate the evacuations. Do not engage the enemy directly. Your duty is to save lives. Her voice, calm and unshakable, cut through the rising panic, a beacon of order in the chaos. The 4th Division medics moved with renewed purpose. But it wasn't enough. An echo, larger than the others, broke through the line. Drifting toward a makeshift shelter where a group of terrified children were huddled. A lieutenant from the 3rd Division, Hiraizuru, moved to intercept, his face a mask of grim determination. But his Zanpakuto was useless. He was about to be overrun. That one is mine, Naruto said. He stepped forward, clapping his hands together. He didn't shout a technique name. He didn't gather energy. He became a conduit. Golden light erupted from him, not as a beam or a blast, but as a tidal wave. It spread across the battlefield, forming a massive, translucent dome of shimmering gold energy that sealed off the entire district. The echoes slammed against its inner wall, their negating aura fizzling harmlessly against the pure, life-affirming power. Every Shinigami on the battlefield, from the rawest recruit to the seasoned lieutenants, stopped and stared. They had never felt anything like it. It wasn't Retsu. It was warm, calming, and impossibly powerful. It pushed back the soul-chilling cold of the echoes, offering a moment of respite, a breath of air to a drowning man. Naruto didn't stop there. He held the dome with one hand, a monumental feat of control, and with the other. He pointed toward the echo threatening the children. A spear of condensed golden light, humming with power, shot from his fingertip. It didn't travel like a Keto spell, it simply appeared before its target. The spear struck the echo, and instead of exploding, it pierced through its silent core. The creature convulsed, and from the point of impact, the golden light spread like a dye in water, overriding its nothingness with pure, vibrant life. The echo dissolved, not into dust, but into a shower of harmless, glowing golden motes that rained down and faded away. He had just shown Reds of Soul Reapers what he had shown Unohana on that hilltop. This enemy could be fought. Hope, potent and fierce, surged through the ranks. But as Naruto focused on containing the plague and eliminating the targets one by one, the Shinigami on the front lines were still in peril. A cluster of 3 echoes cornered a squad of 4th Division medics who had pushed too far forward trying to retrieve a wounded officer. They were trapped, their defensive Keto barriers being eaten away by the encroaching silence. Unohana saw it. Her division, her people, were about to be erased. There was no time for Naruto to intervene. He was holding back the tide. This required a scalpel, not a shield. Maintain the barrier, she said to Naruto, her voice dropping an octave, losing all its warmth and gaining the sharp edge of honed steel. She moved. It was not the elegant, restrained grace she had used against Naruto. This was the brutal, terrifying efficiency of a Kenpachi. She appeared in front of her wrapped medics in a flicker of shunpo so fast it left the air cracking behind her. Her Zanpakuto was already in her hand, its name a whispered prayer on her lips. Minazuki. The blade didn't transform. It didn't glow. But the air around her became thick and heavy, like blood. Her serene face was now a cold, predatory mask, her eyes narrowed to slits. She met the 3 advancing echoes, not with Keto, not with flashy techniques, but with pure, perfect swordsmanship. Her blade became a blur of impossible arcs. She didn't try to cut through the center of the creatures. She was smarter than that. She targeted the infinitesimally small points where their forms were weakest, where their hold on reality was the most tenuous. Each strike was a masterclass in anatomy, even for a creature that shouldn't have won. She wasn't just a swordsman. She was a butcher, and her artistry was death. She flowed between the three echoes, a dance of utter lethality, her blade weaving a web of silver around them. They couldn't touch her. She was a ghost, a phantom of pure violence. Across the battlefield, Naruto watched her. He held the dome steady, the lives of hundreds resting on his concentration, but a part of his awareness was locked onto her. He saw the cold fury in her eyes, the brutal economy of her every move. He saw the monster she kept locked away, the first Kenpachi, unleashed out of necessity. He saw the soul of a killer fighting to protect the lives of healers. And he felt no judgment. No fear. Only a profound sense of respect and a deep, aching empathy for the burden she carried. To have such a terrible power. To wield it only in the defense of that which you hold most dear, it was a pain he understood better than anyone. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the chaos. In his gaze, she saw no shock. No revulsion at the killer she had revealed. She saw only acceptance. A calm, unwavering understanding that went deeper than words. It was a silent acknowledgement of her true self. Of both the healer and the warrior, and it struck her with more force than any physical blow. In that moment, she felt seen. Truly seen, for the first time in centuries. The moment of connection galvanized them. They became a perfectly synchronized unit. Naruto became the shield, the immovable object, containing the battlefield, protecting the innocent, and eliminating the echoes with precise, overwhelming force. Unohana became the sword, the unstoppable force, moving through the gaps in his defense, dismantling any threat that got too close with a terrifying, beautiful lethality. Life and death, creation and destruction. Working in perfect, deadly harmony. Slowly, inexorably, they turned the tide. The remaining echoes, seemingly sensing their imminent defeat, began to retreat, solving back into the shadows from which they came. In their wake, they left behind a scarred, silent district and dozens of Shinigami staring in awe at the two figures who had saved them. As the last echo faded, Naruto let the golden dome dissolve into a gentle shower of light. An exhausted silence fell over the district, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the calm orders of the 4th Division medics. Unohana sheathed her blade. The transition from Kenpachi back to captain so seamless it was jarring. The bloodlust faded from her eyes, replaced by her usual serene calm, but Naruto could see the tremor in her hands. The deep weariness in her soul. The mask was back in place, but he had seen behind it. She walked over to him, standing amidst the medics working tirelessly in the makeshift triage center. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind the grim reality of the aftermath. The threat is evolving, she said, her voice steady, professional. This was a coordinated military strike. They were testing our defenses. They found them wanting, Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping over the wounded. Without you, they would have lost far more than just a few officers. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of condemnation. She found none. And without your power, she acknowledged, my sword would have been meaningless against the tide. He offered her a small, tired smile. Seems we make a good team. He then looked at her, his blue eyes holding a warmth that seemed to push back the lingering chill of the battle. You were incredible, he said, his voice soft, meant for her alone. He wasn't talking about her command, or her healing. He was talking about the warrior. The deadly, beautiful, terrifying warrior he had just witnessed. The simple, honest praise street. Retsu Unohana in a place she had fortified for 1,000 years. It was a validation of the part of her she despised and feared, the part she had tried to bury beneath a millennium of gentle smiles and healing hands. And it came from the one being in all of existence who seemed to be her perfect opposite. A complex, unfamiliar emotion bloomed in her chest. It was warm, and it was frightening, and it was something she knew. With absolute certainty, would change everything. We should see to the wounded, she said, her voice a little too quiet, as she turned away, unable to meet his gaze any longer. But as she walked into the heart of her division's operations, the gentle healer once more, she couldn't shake the feeling of his words, or the memory of his accepting gaze. The gilded cage had been broken open. And what was stepping out was far more dangerous than just a man with golden eyes. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Soul's Remnant. The aftermath of the battle was a quiet, grinding war of attrition. The 4th Division barracks, normally a place of serene order, had transformed into an overwhelmed bastion against pain and loss. Every bed was filled, and then every available space in the hallways, courtyards, and dojos. The air was thick with the scent of blood sanitizing agents, medicinal herbs, and the low, green hum of healing keto. The silence of the echoes had been replaced by the muted groans of the wounded and the hushed, tireless whispers of the medics. Naruto moved among them, a silent, golden current in the river of green-robed healers. He did not interfere with their work. He did not offer to mend the great, gaping wounds or re-knit shattered bones. The 4th Division's expertise in such matters was absolute. Instead, he sought out the cases they struggled with, the injuries that were not of the body, but of the soul. He found a young woman, a promising member of the 3rd Division, who lay catatonic. Her physical wounds had been healed, but she had been partially caught by an echo's aura. Her eyes were open, vacant, staring at a horror only she could see. Her Retsu was a frantic, terrified knot. The medics could do nothing. Her soul was recoiling from the world, rejecting its own existence. Naruto knelt beside her, placing his hand on her sternum. He didn't pour power into her. He simply listened. He felt the shape of her fear, the memory of non-excess tense that had imprinted itself upon her. Then, with an act of will, he projected a feeling, not a memory, but a pure, conceptual warmth. The feeling of sun on skin, the taste of clean water, the sound of a loved one's laughter. He projected the simple, undeniable truth that it was good to be alive. The knot of her Retsu slowly, hesitantly, began to unwind. Color returned to her cheeks. A single tear rolled down her face. And her vacant eyes blinked, focusing on his face for the first time. The terror was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She was saved. He did this again and again, moving from bed to bed. A quiet force of restoration. He was not just healing. He was fighting the psychological poison the echoes left behind. Unohana watched him from a distance, her expression unreadable. Her division mended the damage to the body, but he was mending the damage to the soul. They were two halves of a whole, and the efficiency of their combined effort was staggering. The mortality rate from the attack, which should have been catastrophic, was plummeting toward zero. It was in the midst of this focused, desperate work that the new crisis arrived. It came not with sirens, but with the cold, sterile presence of the 12th Division. A squad of their members, clad in white, form-fitting uniforms that looked more like laboratory gear than Shinigami robes, marched into the 4th Division with an air of detached superiority. They were led by a short, hunched figure in a captain's haori, whose face was painted in a grotesque black and white mask. Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi did not walk so much as he stalked, his golden eyes scanning the infirmary with a mixture of disdain and predatory curiosity. He ignored the wounded, his gaze falling only on Naruto, lingering for a moment. With an unnervingly analytical intensity. Unohana, he hissed, his voice a distorted, metallic rasp. I am told one of the specimens was captured. Where have you put it? Unohana met him at the center of the main hall. Her serene presence a stark contrast to his twitching, unsettling energy. Captain Kuretsuchi. The entity has been contained in the lower levels, as per emergency protocol. What is your purpose here? Purpose. Mayuri cackled, a sound like grinding glass. My purpose is the pursuit of knowledge. An entity that can negate matter and spiritual energy. A being that defies our understanding of existence. It is a scientific treasure trove. I am here to collect my specimen for immediate dissection and analysis. Central 46 has already approved my request. At the mention of Central 46, a chill went through the room. The supreme authority of the Soul Society had spoken. Their word was law, absolute and unbreakable. Naruto, who had been calming a panicking Shinigami nearby, straightened up. His attention now fully on the exchange. A specimen for dissection. The words felt like acid in his ears. I will escort you, Unohana said, her voice betraying no emotion. She led Yuri and his team down a series of stark, white corridors to the deepest, most secure level of the barracks. There, In a circular chamber, was a containment cell. The walls were lined with Keto-inscribed seals that pulsed with a steady blue light. Floating in the center of the cell was the captured Echo. It was smaller than the others, its form flickering and unstable. But what made everyone pause? Was the image that would occasionally phase into view across its featureless black surface. It was the terrified, agonized face of a man, a seated officer from the 5th Division named Kenjiro Hayashi. His face would appear for a second, mouth open in a silent scream, before being swallowed back into the void. Magnificent, Mayuri breathed, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. It didn't just consume him. It has assimilated his soul matrix. The potential data here is boundless. We can learn the mechanics of its negation abilities, perhaps even replicate them. That specimen, Naruto's voice cut through the air, low and cold. As a man, a Shinigami who fought to protect this place. Mayuri turned his unsettling gaze on Naruto. Ah, the anomaly. Your energy signature is perplexing. Yo, you are an object of great interest to me as well. But do not confuse your sentimentality with science. The individual known as Kenjiro Hayashi is gone. What remains is a unique biological and spiritual phenomenon. His sacrifice will pave the way for a greater understanding that could save thousands. Just then, two figures appeared at the entrance of the chamber, materializing from the shadows. They were robed and hooded. Their faces completely obscured, their presence radiating an ancient, unyielding authority. They were emissaries from Central 46. Captain Kuretsuchi. Captain Unohana. One of them spoke, their voice a dry, emotionless monotone. By decree of the Central 46, you are to render the captured entity, designated Specimen 734, into the custody of the 12th Division for research. Captain Unohana. Your division's role is to ensure the secure transfer. There will be no delays. Unohana bowed her head slightly. It will be done. No. The single word, spoken quietly but with the force of an earthquake, made every head turn to Naruto. He stepped forward, placing himself between Mayuri's team and the containment cell. His calm, blue eyes were now burning with a cold, righteous fire. You will not touch him, he stated. Mayuri's grin became a grotesque leer. And who are you to defy a direct order from Central 46? You are a guest here, an unclassified variable. You have no authority. My authority comes from the fact that I am the only one here who sees a life worth saving, not a specimen to be butchered, Naruto retorted, his gaze shifting to Unohana. It was a look of disbelief, of profound disappointment. You would allow this? You, a healer? The question struck Unohana like a physical blow. Her serene mask tightened, her eyes becoming hard. I am a captain of the Gote 13 First, Naruto. My duty is to the Soul Society. The law is absolute. The potential knowledge gained from studying this creature could prevent another attack like the one we just endured. It is a necessary, if unpleasant, sacrifice. A necessary sacrifice. Naruto's voice was laced with a bitter irony he rarely showed. That's what they always say, isn't it? The people who have the power to decide who lives and who dies. I watched my entire world get sacrificed for the greater good. I will not stand by and watch you make the same mistake. There is a man in there. I can feel him. He's terrified, and he's alone. But he is alive. I can save him. Save him. Mayuri scoffed. Delusional. His soul has been integrated into the entity's matrix. Separating them would be like trying to take the salt out of the ocean. Your sentiment is clouding your judgment. And your ambition is blinding you to your cruelty, Naruto shot back. He turned his full attention to Unohana, his voice pleading, challenging. Don't do this, Retsu. Don't let them turn this place of healing into a butcher's shop. Let me try. Her name on his lips, spoken with such raw, personal weight in this cold, official setting, caused a flicker in her composure. Her duty, her laws, her millennia of service, were at war with the undeniable truth she saw in his eyes. He was not being naive. He was being consistent. He was a force of life. And the idea of willingly sacrificing one was anathema to his very being. The Central 46 emissary stepped forward. Your debate is irrelevant. The decision has been made. Captain Unohana, restrain the Ryoka. If he resists, you are authorized to use lethal force. The moment hung, stretched taut. Every eye was on her. Mayuri watched with gleeful anticipation. The emissaries waited with cold patience. Naruto watched her, his expression not of anger, but of a final, desperate appeal. Retsu Unohana closed her eyes for a single, long second. In that second, she saw the battle in the Tenkan district. She saw Naruto's golden shield protecting her people. She saw the unwavering acceptance in his eyes when she had unleashed the killer within. She felt the ghost of his touch on her collarbone. Where a scar 1,000 years old used to be. He hadn't just healed a wound. He had offered restoration. A new path. She opened her eyes. They were clear, calm, and absolutely resolved. She drew her Zanpakuto. Mayuri's grin widened, but it faltered when he saw she was not facing Naruto. She had turned, her blade held in a simple defensive stance, placing herself between Naruto and the rest of them. Captain Unohana, what is the meaning of this? The emissary demanded, their monotone voice finally cracking with shock. This is treason. Naruto Uzumaki is under my personal observation. By order of the head captain himself, Unohana stated, her voice as cold and sharp as the edge of her blade. His unique abilities are our greatest asset against this new threat. I will not allow that asset to be compromised by a premature and, frankly, barbaric experiment. No one will interfere with him. Mayuri's face contorted in a mask of fury. You dare defy us. You, the model of obedience. My duty is to the preservation of the Soul Society, she replied, her gaze unwavering. And I have come to believe that his way is the better path. She glanced over her shoulder at Naruto. The message was clear. You have your chance. Do not fail. A surge of profound gratitude and respect washed over Naruto. She had just risked everything. Her position, her reputation, her very life, on a single, desperate hope. He would not let her down. He turned to the containment cell, placing his hands on the cold, transparent wall. He closed his eyes, shutting out the furious shouts of emissaries and Mayuri's venomous threats. He reached out with his senses, past the shimmering void of the echo, searching for the flickering candle flame of Kenjiro Hayashi's soul. He found it, trapped in a cage of absolute silence. Being slowly, methodically unmade. He plunged his consciousness into the void. The world vanished. There was no sound, no sight, no feeling. Only a crushing, pulling emptiness that sought to dissolve his own sense of self. It was the heart of the echo, the engine of its negation. It was a place where life did not belong. But he was here. He pushed through the nothingness. A golden sun of pure life in an endless night, following the faint thread of connection to the trapped soul. He found Kenjiro's consciousness, a terrified, weeping ball of light. Let me go, it pleaded. Just let it end. The silence, it's so cold. I'm not letting you go, Naruto projected back, his own consciousness a shield around the fading soul. I'm taking you home. He began the impossible surgery. He couldn't just pull the soul out, it was woven into the fabric of the echo. He had to carefully, painstakingly, sever every thread of nothingness that was latched onto Kenjiro's being, while simultaneously weaving new threads of life energy to keep the soul from unraveling. It was the most delicate, most mentally taxing thing he had ever done. The void fought back, not with attacks, but with its very nature. Constantly trying to pull him apart, to make him forget himself, to make him cease. Outside, in the chamber, Unohana stood like a statue of iron, her blade steady, her killing intent a palpable defensive wall that kept the fuming 12th Division captain and the emissaries at bay. She watched as Naruto's body began to glow with a brilliant, golden light, so intense it was difficult to look at. The echo in the cell writhed and convulsed, its form flickering violently between its black, featureless state and the screaming face of the trapped Shinigami. The Kido's eels on the walls began to crack under the strain of the conflicting energies. The procedure felt like an eternity. Finally, with one last, monumental effort, Naruto severed the final thread. He pulled back, his consciousness snapping back into his own body with a painful jolt. In the cell, the echo let out a silent, wrenching scream. Its form imploded, collapsing in on itself until it was a tiny, shimmering ball of blackness, which then evaporated into nothing. Lying on the floor of the now empty cell, unconscious but breathing, was the corporeal form of Kenjiro Hayashi. He was pale, gaunt, but he was whole. His soul was his own again. Naruto staggered back from the wall, sweat beading on his forehead, a deep exhaustion etched onto his face. He had done it. He had stared into the void and stolen a life back from its grasp. The chamber was utterly silent. Mayuri stared, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. The emissaries were frozen, their authoritative facade completely shattered by the miracle they had just witnessed. Unohana sheathed her sword, the sound echoing in the silence. She walked over to Naruto, her eyes soft with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It was awe, relief, and a deep, profound respect that transcended rank and duty. You were reckless, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was necessary, he breathed, a weary but triumphant smile touching his lips. She reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm to steady him, an act of support that was as shocking and unprecedented as her defiance of Central 46. My, a slow, drawling voice echoed from the corridor. Sosuke Aizen stepped into the chamber, flanked by Jin Ichimaru and Kanami Tosen. His expression was one of mild, academic interest, but Naruto could feel the roaring excitement hidden deep within him. It seems we arrived just in time to witness a miracle. He looked from the saved Shinigami to Naruto, his smile widening. To reverse the irreversible. To bring a soul back from the brink of negation. Your power, Uzumaki-san, is truly divine. Aizen's gaze was a physical weight, filled with a terrifying, possessive hunger. He wasn't looking at a person. He was looking at a key. The ultimate key, capable of unlocking any door he could possibly imagine. And as Naruto looked back, steadying himself on Unohana's arm, he understood. The echoes were a cancer, but this smiling, gentle fact. Ed Man might just be the far greater monster. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The weight of a name. The air in the sterile containment chamber was thick with unspoken declarations of war. Mayuri's rage was a palpable, twitching thing. His painted face a mask of thwarted ambition. The Central 46 emissaries stood rigid with fury, their authority flouted, their entire worldview challenged by the impossible act they had just witnessed. And into this tableau of defiance and disbelief, Sosuke Aizen had glided, his calm smile the most dangerous weapon in the room. Treason is such a strong word, Aizen said. His voice a soothing balm on a raw wound, as he positioned himself between Unohana and the emissaries. I see no treason here. I see a successful, if unorthodox, field experiment. The emissary's head snapped toward him. Experiment. This was a direct violation of our decree. A decree made with incomplete information, Aizen countered smoothly, his logic impeccable and infuriating. You order. Ed the specimen studied to find a way to combat the echoes. Captain Unohana and Uzumaki-san have just demonstrated a method not merely to combat them, but to reverse their effects entirely. They have achieved the desired outcome. Have they not? And with 0 casualties. He gestured to the unconscious but living Kenjiro Hayashi. In fact, they have turned a casualty into a survivor. A source of invaluable intelligence on the enemy's internal mechanics. This is not a failure of duty. This is an unprecedented success. He framed their rebellion as a brilliant, forward-thinking triumph. It was a masterful act of political judo. Using the emissaries' own stated goals to disarm them. They were left sputtering, unable to argue the logic without admitting their own methods were inferior. Aizen then turned his serene gaze to Mayuri. Captain Kuretsuchi, your desire for knowledge is commendable. But dissection yields data on the dead. This gives us the testimony of the living. I trust you will agree that interviewing a survivor is far more valuable than autopsying a victim. Mayuri hissed, a sound of a cornered snake, but he could not refute the point, not publicly. Aizen had checkmated them all. He had taken Unohana and Naruto's catastrophic act of defiance and spun it into a legend in the making. He was not just protecting them, he was elevating them, creating a new power center within the Seraite that was intrinsically tied to his own intervention. My apologies for the misunderstanding, Aizen said to the emissaries with a slight bow, oozing false deference. I will only oversee the interrogation of Officer Hayashi and deliver a full report to Central 46. You have witnessed a historic moment. The Soul Society now has a definitive countermeasure to our new enemy. Defeated. The emissaries vanished into the shadows, their purpose nullified. Mayuri shot a look of pure venom at Naruto and Unohana before stalking out, his science team trailing meekly in his wake. The storm had passed, leaving a strange, ringing silence in its wake. Aizen's smile finally met Naruto's eyes. It was a look of profound, terrifying understanding. You continue to exceed all expectations, Uzumaki-san. You are a true miracle worker. Then, with a nod to Unohana, he too was gone, leaving them alone in the aftermath of the war they had started and he had finished. The journey back to Unohana's personal quarters was a silent one. The adrenaline had faded, the righteous fire of defiance had cooled, leaving behind a deep, resonant exhaustion that was more spiritual than physical. The weight of his actions, of defying the supreme authority of this world, of risking Unohana's life and position, settled on Naruto's shoulders. He had won. He had saved a life. But he felt no triumph. Only the immense, crushing weariness of the fight. Unohana led him into her private office, a space of elegant, minimalist design. A single, perfect work of calligraphy hung on the wall. A low table sat in the center of the room. Surrounded by cushions, she gestured for him to sit, then moved to prepare tea with a series of precise, practiced movements that were as calming and focused as her healing Kido. The clink of the ceramic cups, the whisper of hot water pouring, the fragrant scent of the tea leaves. It was a simple, grounding ritual that slowly began to push back the sterile cold of the confrontation. She placed a cup of steaming tea before him. He stared into its green depths, his reflection a pale, tired version of himself. You are depleted, she observed, her voice soft, the captain replaced by the healer. I have never seen you like this. Reaching into that void. It cost you something. He took a slow sip of the tea, the warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't power, he said, his voice quiet. It was focus, memory. To be in that place, the nothingness, it tries to make you forget you are a person. It tries to unmake your identity. I had to hold on to myself, and to him, with everything I had. He looked up at her, his blue eyes clouded with a sorrow that seemed ancient. No one should ever have to feel that kind of cold. Unohana sat opposite him, her own tea untouched. The professional distance between them had been shattered by their shared act of rebellion. What was left was something more fragile, more real. You risked everything for one man. A man you did not know. Why? It was the question that hung between them, the question that had made her draw her sword against her own government. Naruto was silent for a long time, gathering his thoughts. Deciding on a truth she had earned the right to hear. Because in my world, he began, his voice a low murmur, I was too late to save anyone. He told her everything. Not the sanitized version he had given the captains, but the raw, brutal truth. He spoke of his childhood as a pariah, the lonely boy who would do anything for acknowledgement. He spoke of the friends he had made, the bonds he had forged, the village that had finally become his home. He spoke of the endless wars, the cycle of hatred, the desperate struggle to protect his precious people. And then he spoke of the end. Of an enemy that was not a person but a concept, a being of absolute, all-consuming power that had been the progenitor of their world's energy. He described the final battle, a desperate alliance of all nations against a force that could rewrite reality. He told her about Kurama, the tailed beast within him, his partner, his oldest and truest friend. He described their final, desperate gambit, a fusion of all their power into a single strike to save their world. We failed, he said, his voice cracking for the first time. The mask of serene confidence was gone, revealing the broken heart of a boy who had lost his entire world. I felt it all. Every life, every friend, every soul I ever cared about, extinguished. Snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. I was at the very center of it, the last thing I remember is Kurama's roar as he was torn away from me. My world was erased, Retsu. Utterly and completely. The only reason I exist is because my own life energy, fused with his, was so potent that when our reality collapsed, it reformed me here. I'm not just a survivor. I'm a ghost. A walking, breathing memory of a dead world. He finally looked at her, and she saw the full, crushing weight he carried. So when I saw that man, Kenjiro, trapped in that same cold, silent nothingness, when I heard your leaders call him a necessary sacrifice, I couldn't let it happen. I can't save my world. But I have to be able to save one man in this one. If I can't do that, then my life, this second chance, is meaningless. Tears welled in his eyes, tears he refused to let fall. The divine being was gone. In his place was just Naruto Uzumaki, a lonely, grieving soul who had carried an impossible burden across the death of a universe. Retsu Unohana felt his pain as if it were her own. The loneliness of a power so great it set you apart from everyone. The ghost of a past that you could never outrun. She had lived with those same feelings for 1,000 years. His confession was not a burden, it was a bridge. She reached across the table, her movements slow, deliberate. She placed her hand over his, her touch warm and firm. It was an anchor in his sea of grief. I understand, she whispered. And her voice held the weight of a millennium of truth. More than you know. He looked up at her, his surprise cutting through his sorrow. You see me as a healer, she said, her gaze turning inward. To a past she had locked away from the world. And I am. But it is not what I was. It is the cage I built for myself. She told him her own story. Of a time when the Soul Society was a lawless, brutal place of warring clans. Of a young woman who had mastered every form of swordplay, every way to kill a person, and had reveled in it. She told him of her hunger for a true battle, a real challenge. Of how she had sought out the most infamous criminals and killers, not for justice, but for the thrill of the fight, and how she had slaughtered them all. There was no one left, she said, her voice a low, haunted thing. No one who could match me. No one who could even make me draw my full strength. And in that victory, I found only emptiness. A profound, soul-crushing silence that was worse than any wound. She gave a small, bitter smile. The greatest killer in the world, with no one left worth killing. She told him about the title she had given herself, a name that all of Soul Society had come to fear. Yakiru Kenpachi. The first Kenpachi. The strongest. To be the Kenpachi, she explained, is to live only for the fight. And when the fights end, what is left? I had reached the pinnacle of death. And all I found there was a void. So, I abandoned the name. I learned the art of healing, the opposite of my nature. I learned to preserve life instead of take it. I created Retsu Unohana as a penance. A cage, for the monster that was Yakiru. A way to atone for a past I could never erase. She instinctively touched her collarbone, where the scar used to be. That scar you healed. It was the only wound I ever received in a battle where I felt alive. From a wild, powerful boy who fought with pure, joyful instinct. I could have killed him. But I saw in him a potential I hadn't seen in centuries. A chance for someone, someday, to be strong enough to face me again. To finally give Yakiru the death in battle she craved. So I defeated him, but I let him live. She looked at Naruto. Her eyes dark with 1,000 years of secrets. That boy grew up to become the current Kenpachi Zaraki. Now it was his turn to be stunned into silence. He looked at this elegant, graceful healer. And saw the blood-soaked demon she had been. He saw her burden. The Kenpachi who had to pretend to be a healer. The warrior who had to mend the very kind of wounds she longed to inflict. The loneliness of being the strongest, forever waiting for an equal who could finally set her free. You've been carrying that all this time, he breathed, his own grief momentarily forgotten in the face of her immense, lonely burden. We all carry the ghosts of our past, Naruto, she said softly, her thumb gently stroking the back of his hand. The weight of the names we've been given, and the names we give ourselves. In that moment, they were no longer a god and a captain. They were just two souls, adrift in a universe that had asked too much of them, who had found in each other the one person who could possibly understand. He was the remnant of a world of life, haunted by death. She was the master of death, seeking to atone through life. They were two sides of the same, ancient coin. He turned his hand over. His fingers lacing with hers. The contact was simple, profound. It was not the touch of a healer, or a god, but of a man reaching out for a connection he thought he had lost forever. He saw in her eyes not just a captain or a warrior, but a woman who had carried an impossible weight alone for far too long. And she saw in his eyes not an anomaly or a divine power, but a man with a heart vast enough to grieve for a lost world, and strong enough to try and save a new one. The last of their walls crumbled, not in a great crash, but in a quiet, surrendering sigh. The gilded cage had served its purpose. It had brought them together, and their shared truth had just set them both free. Far away, in the quiet solitude of his office, Sosuke Aizen placed a go stone on the board before him. The black stone clicked softly against the wood. Jin Ichimaru lounged nearby, his perpetual, sly grin in place. That was quite a gamble you took back there, Captain Aizen, Jin drawled. Defying Central 46 so openly. Ain't like you. On the contrary, Jin, Aizen replied, not taking his eyes off the board. It was the most logical move. An uncontrolled asset is a liability. A grateful, indebted asset is a tool. He looked at the board. A single black stone now sat in a position that threatened the entire formation of white stones that represented the established order. Today, Naruto Uzumaki defied the law for the sake of one life. And Retsu Unohana, the most law-abiding captain in the Gote 13, defied the law for him. A bond forged in rebellion is the strongest bond of all. Aizen smiled, a true, genuine smile of intellectual and strategic delight. I haven't created a new chess piece, Jin. I've simply introduced a second queen onto the board. The game has just become infinitely more beautiful. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Gambit. In the weeks that followed their shared defiance, a tense, watchful peace settled over the Seraite. The echoes did not return. The gaping hole in the Tenkan district was slowly repaired, the whispers of the attack fading into the grim annals of history. But the peace was a thin sheet of ice over a churning, frigid ocean. Every Shinigami now knew of the threat that could unmake them. And they knew of the strange, golden-haired man who was their only answer. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer just an anomaly, he was a symbol. To the lower-ranked officers and the residents of the Rukongai, he was a savior. To the rigid traditionalists in Central 46 and the upper echelons of nobility, he was a dangerous, destabilizing force. To the captains of the Gote 13, he was a paradox, a power they desperately needed but could not control. For Naruto and Retsu Unohana, this period of quiet was a time of cautious, profound discovery. Their relationship, forged in the crucible of battle and rebellion, now deepened in the shared silences between crises. They would spend long hours in her private garden, the impossible white flower, a silent testament to their connection. He would speak of his world, of chakra, of the vibrant, chaotic energy of nature he so dearly missed. She, in turn, would explain the intricate laws of Reishi and Ryutsu, of the delicate, millennia-long dance of balance the soul society maintained. It was a meeting of two fundamental forces. He taught her to feel the life in the wind, in the stones of her own garden. She taught him to focus his boundless energy, to shape it with the discipline of a Kido master, not to create spells, but to understand control. Their training was less about combat and more about philosophy. She would draw her Zanpakuto, and he would watch, not as a potential opponent, but as a student of form and intent. He would conjure a swirling sphere of pure life energy in his palm, a form reminiscent of a Rasengan, but without its destructive nature, and she would analyze its structure, marveling at the perfect, harmonious balance it contained. Their conversations often strayed from the metaphysical to the personal. He learned of the quiet burden of her command, of the centuries of accumulated grief from every patient she could not save. She learned of his deep, aching loneliness, of the phantom limb he felt where the boisterous, grounding presence of Kurama used to be. They found solace in each other's burdens, a quiet understanding that required no grand declarations. The bond between them was no longer just one of allies, it was becoming a point of gravity in both their lives, a quiet center in a world bracing for a storm. Meanwhile, the rescued Shinigami, Kenjiro Hayashi, provided a terrifying window into the enemy. His testimony, delivered in fragmented, haunted whispers to a select group including Naruto, Unohana, and Yamamoto, spoke not of a place, but of a state of being. He described the consciousness of the void progenitor as a silent, patient hunger, an intellect vast and cold as interstellar space, that did not hate life, but simply wedded as a flaw in the perfect purity of non-existence. It was not an enemy they could reason with or intimidate. It was a philosophical absolute, and its only goal was to correct what it perceived as an error in creation. This knowledge hung over the Seraite, a promise of an existential war to come. And it was into this tense, watchful quiet that Sosuke Aizen chose to make his move. He knew that a direct assault on Naruto, a being of pure life, was futile. And to attack Unohana would only galvanize Naruto's power. No, the way to defeat Naruto was not to break his body, but to break the world around him. To shatter the trust he was building, to isolate him, and to turn the very people he sought to protect against him. To do that, Aizen needed a new kind of weapon. Not an echo of silence that consumed, but something far more insidious. An echo of whispers. The target was chosen with a chess master's precision. Captain Jashiro Yukitake of the 13th Division. A man of unimpeachable honor, beloved by all, whose kindness and integrity were legendary. To frame such a man would be to prove that no one was safe, that the very soul of the Gote 13 could be corrupted. Yukitake's chronic, weakening illness was not just a vulnerability, it was the perfect keyhole for Aizen's key. One evening, as Yukitake supervised the evening patrol change at his barracks, his ever-present cough struck him. This time, it was a severe, racking fit that left him gasping for air, his vision swimming. He leaned against a polished wooden pillar for support, his spiritual energy flickering like a guttering candle flame. In that moment of profound weakness, no one noticed a shimmer in the air behind the pillar, a distortion no larger than a man's hand. It wasn't black like the other echoes, it was a near invisible ripple in the reishi of the air. It reached out, not to consume, but to touch. A single, cold thread of nothingness brushed against the frayed edges of Yukitake's fluctuating Retsu. It took a sample, a perfect imprint of his spiritual signature, his memories, his mannerisms. It created a flawless, invisible seed of mimicry. Then, it was gone. Yukitake recovered, shaking his head with a weary sigh, attributing the dizzy spell to his illness, and thought no more of it. The serpent's venom had been delivered, and the victim was entirely unaware. 2 days later, the Seraite was ripped from its tense peace by an alarm that chilled the blood of even the most hardened veterans. It was not the general invasion siren, but a series of deep, resonant tolls from the bell atop the Sen Tral Tower, the signal for a Class 1 security breach. A violation of the Darishokairo, the Great Spirit Book Gallery. The Darishokairo was the sanctum sanctorum of the Soul Society, a library that held not just their history, but their deepest and most dangerous secrets. It contained forbidden Kido, the blueprints of the Soul King's original prison, and records of crimes committed by the founding members of the Gote 13. To enter without authorization was the highest form of treason. The initial reports were chaotic, but as Soi Fan and the Onmitsukido descended upon the scene, a horrifyingly clear picture began to form. The intricate seals on the forbidden archives had been bypassed with a master's touch. A single document had been stolen. The original transcription of the Koto Amatsukami. A text detailing the Soul King's ability to manipulate the cognition of all beings, a conceptual power thought to be a mere myth. The implications were staggering. In the wrong hands, such Knoll DGE could unravel the fabric of their entire society. The evidence left at the scene was sparse but damning. A single white strand of hair. And a clear, unmistakable residue of Ryutsu that belonged, without a shadow of a doubt, to Captain Jashiro Yukitake. The news spread through the Seraite like a poison. Disbelief warred with the cold, hard facts presented by the 2nd Division's investigation. Multiple guards from the archive's outer perimeter, when interrogated under the influence of the 9th Division's truth serum specialists, swore they had seen Captain Yukitake enter the restricted zone, offering them his signature gentle smile before telling them he was on a special assignment from the head captain. The Gote 13 was thrown into turmoil. Captain Commander Yamamoto was a monolith of cold fury. Shunsui Kyoraku, Yukitake's oldest and closest friend, was a wall of grim, unshakable denial, his usual lazy demeanor replaced by a dangerous stillness. The other captains were divided, caught between their respect for a man they had known for centuries and the mountain of irrefutable evidence. The Serpent's gambit was working perfectly. The body of the Gote 13 was beginning to turn on itself. In the quiet garden of the 4th Division, Naruto felt the shift immediately. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a feeling in the very energy of the Seraite. The ordered, harmonious flow had become discordant, spiked with the sharp, bitter notes of fear, suspicion, and betrayal. Something is wrong, he said, looking up from the stone he was meditating on. Unohana, who was reading a medical report nearby, paused, her gaze lifting to meet his. The Darishokairo has been breached, she informed him, her voice low and grave. A document of immense importance has been stolen. They say the evidence points to Captain Yukitake. Naruto frowned, his brow furrowing. He had met Yukitake only briefly, but the man's life energy had been one of the clearest and kindest he had ever sensed, a gentle, flowing river marred only by the shadow of his illness. No, he said, with an absolute certainty that had nothing to do with evidence. It wasn't him. The entire 2nd Division and the Central 46 investigators believe otherwise. She cautioned, though her own eyes held a flicker of doubt. She had seen how Aizen manipulated events, how easily the truth could be bent into a weapon. Their investigation is flawed, Naruto insisted, standing up. He began to pace, his mind racing. They are looking at Retsu, at witness testimony. They are looking at the surface. This feels like the echoes. Not the attack, but the feeling. The silence. It feels hollow. He stopped, his eyes locking with hers. When I fought that first echo, it felt like a hole in the world. When I rescued Kenjiro, I felt the void inside him. The Retsu signature they found. I'll bet it feels the same way. It looks right, it feels right, but if you truly listen, there's no life in it. No soul. Unohana stood, her decision made in an instant. Her trust in his unique perception was now absolute. Soi Fan has confined Captain Yukitake to his quarters pending a formal inquest. She intends to take him into the sea. You study of the maggot's nest this evening. If we are going to act, we must act now. Their own investigation was a quiet, shadow-bound thing. While the 2nd Division focused on Yukitake himself, Unohana used her authority to grant them access to the crime scene. The Darishokairo was cold, sterile, the air still thick with the residue of alarm Kido. As the Onmitsukido agents watched them with suspicion, Naruto walked to the spot where the Retsu had been most concentrated. He closed his eyes, placing his hand on the floor. He didn't search for energy. He listened for its absence. And he found it. It was faint, almost completely gone. But it was there. A tiny, lingering splinter of that same, soul-chilling cold. A pinprick of negation in the vibrant tapestry of the Seraite. It was one of them. He said to Unohana in a low voice. A new kind. It didn't consume him. It copied him. It created a puppet. The 13th Division barracks was an oasis of tranquility, its gardens filled with blooming flowers and koi ponds. But today, a funereal silence hung over it. The members of the division stood in tense, unhappy clusters, their faces etched with confusion and loyalty to their accused captain. At the entrance to Yukitake's personal chambers stood a line of Soi Fan's elite Onmitsukido, a wall of black cloth and cold steel. Soi Fan herself stood before the closed door, her small frame radiating an unyielding, almost fanatical adherence to the law. Jashiro Yukitake, she called out, her voice sharp and clear. By order of the Central 46, you are under arrest on suspicion of high treason. Come out now, and your surrender will be noted with leniency. The door slid open. Yukitake stood there, flanked by a grim-faced Shunsui Kyoraku. The white-haired captain looked pale and exhausted. His illness and the stress of the accusation having taken a severe toll. But his eyes were clear, filled not with guilt, but with a deep, weary sadness. Soi Fan-chan, he said, his voice raspy but calm. I have told you. I do not remember this. I would never betray the Soul Society. Your memories are irrelevant in the face of the evidence, Soi Fan retorted coldly. My duty is to the law, not to sentiment. You will come with us. Her guards tensed, ready to move. He's not going anywhere. The new voice, calm and firm, made them all turn. Naruto and Unohana stood at the edge of the garden, having approached with a silence that rivaled the Onmitsukido's own. Soi Fan's eyes narrowed into slits of pure fury. Uzumaki. Unohana. This is official 2nd Division business. Your presence here is an interference. Leave now. We are not here to interfere with your investigation, Unohana replied, her voice dangerously placid. We are here to correct it. Naruto walked forward, his steps slow and deliberate, ignoring the hands of the guards that flew to their sword hilts. He walked past Soi Fan, his gaze fixed only on Yukitake. Shunsui tensed, ready to intervene, but a subtle glance from Unohana stayed his hand. Naruto stopped in front of the accused captain. Yukitake looked at him, his expression one of tired confusion. They are not wrong, Captain Yukitake, Naruto said softly, so only the captains could hear. Your Retsu was at the scene of the crime. But it wasn't you. Without asking for permission, Naruto reached out and placed his hand gently on Yukataki's shoulder. Soi Fan's guards surged forward. But she held up a hand, her curiosity, for a moment, overriding her fury. Naruto closed his eyes. He didn't project his energy. He simply sensed. He let his unique perception flow into Yukataki's soul. Past the raging fire of his Retsu, past the cold shadow of his illness. He searched for the hollow note, the splinter of silence he had sensed at the library. And he found it. It was a tiny, parasitic thing, clinging to the edge of Yukataki's soul like a leech, dormant and nearly undetectable. A sliver of pure negation that wore a perfect mask of Yukataki's life force. There, Naruto whispered, his eyes still closed. It's a parasite. A splinter of an echo. It didn't possess you. It shed a piece of itself, a perfect copy, and that is what stole your document. The real you was here the entire time. Lies and speculation. Soi Fan snapped, though a seed of doubt was now visible in her eyes. You have no proof. I am the proof, Naruto said, opening his eyes. They glowed with a soft, golden light. Watch. Quote. The golden light flowed from his hand on Yukataki's shoulder. It was not a torrent of power, but a gentle, precise current. It bypassed Yukataki's own energy, getting only the alien coldness of the splinter. The splinter, sensing its imminent destruction, reacted. It tried to flee, to dissolve back into nothingness. But Naruto's power was not an attack. It was an anchor. He pinned it in place with a thread of life energy. Then, slowly, carefully, he drew it out. Everyone present watched in stunned silence as a thin, shimmering thread of black, viscous energy was pulled from Yukataki's body. It writhed in the air for a moment, a thing of pure malice and mimicry, before Naruto closed his fist around it. The golden light in his hand flared brightly for an instant. And when he opened his hand again, there was nothing left. The splinter had been unmade. Yukataki gasped, a deep, shuddering breath, as if a great weight had been lifted from his soul. The perpetual weariness in his eyes lessened, and the color returned to his face. He stared at Naruto with utter, profound gratitude. Soi Fan was speechless. Her entire case, her perfect evidence, had been dismantled by an act of power she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Her investigation wasn't just wrong, it was irrelevant. The crisis was over. Yukataki was cleared. The Gote 13 had been pulled from the brink of tearing itself apart. But as Soi Fan and her forces retreated in confused humiliation, Aizen, watching from the shadows of a nearby rooftop through the perfect illusion of Kyoka Suigetsu, permitted himself a small, triumphant smile. He had lost the pawn, Yukataki, but the intelligence he had gained was worth 1,000 such gambits. He now knew the true nature of Naruto's senses. He didn't just feel power levels. He felt the very essence of life within a soul. A normal mimicry, even his own perfect illusions, would likely feel hollow to Naruto. But now that he knew what Naruto was sensing for, he could begin to devise a counter. He could learn to mimic not just the signature, but the song. He had probed his enemy's greatest defensive strength and learned its secrets, while appearing to be nothing more than a concerned colleague. Later that evening, in Yukataki's garden, the air was calm again. Yukataki and Shunsui sat with Naruto and Unohana, a quiet mood of gratitude and unease filling the space. I owe you my life and my honor, Uzumaki-san, Yukataki said, his voice filled with sincere emotion. We all do, Shunsui added, his lazy demeanor gone. His eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows. This was a clean attack. Too clean. Whoever did this wanted to fracture us. They wanted us to turn on each other. His gaze was knowing. He didn't say Aizen's name, but the implication hung in the air. Naruto looked at Unohana. He saw in her eyes the same realization that was dawning in his own heart. The echoes, the void progenitor, they were a terrible, world-ending threat. But they were a straightforward one. A hurricane that could be seen coming. The true, immediate danger was the serpent hiding in their own garden, the one who smiled to their faces while plotting to burn their world from within. Their alliance, their bond, had just been tested and proven strong. But they both knew this was only the opening move in a much longer, darker game. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Kenpachi's Roar. God's Resolve. The fragile peace, bought with Naruto's revelation and Unohana's defiance, was a lie. They both knew it. In the days following the exoneration of Jashiro Yukitake, the Seraite was a fortress holding its breath. The enemy within, the serpent Aizen, was now a known, if unprovable, threat. This new reality colored every interaction, turning polite nods in the corridors into silent assessments, and friendly meetings into potential fronts for espionage. Naruto and Unohana found their sanctuary in the early mornings, in the quiet solitude of her garden. Before the 4th Division stirred to life, the air would be cool and clean, the single white flower a beacon in the twilight dawn. It was here that they spoke not as assets or captains, but as two people standing on the edge of a precipice. He knows I can see through his illusions now, Naruto said one morning, watching the koi drift in their pond. He was tracing a pattern on the surface of the water with a finger. The reishi of the air coalescing around it in a gentle, golden swirl. The mimic echo was a test. He was probing my senses. He won't make the same mistake twice. He is not the kin of man to use the same trick twice regardless, Retsu replied. She was seated on the veranda, her posture one of perfect, relaxed grace, but Naruto could feel the tension coiled deep within her, a spring wound tight. The public revelation of her past had not yet come, but the near betrayal of Yukitake had reminded them all how quickly their world could be turned upside down. He has been at this game for centuries, Naruto. Moving pieces we never knew were on the board. We have exposed one of his plots, but in doing so, we have revealed our hand. Then we need to be stronger, Naruto stated simply. He looked at her, his blue eyes holding a new, harder light. The loss of his world had tempered his youthful exuberance into a calm resolve. The threat of Aizen was honing that resolve into a razor's edge. Not just in power, in trust. He will try to break us apart. He will use the laws of the Soul Society, the fear of the captains, the threat of the void, whatever it takes to isolate us from each other. That is his only path to victory. She met his gaze, and in the quiet space between them, a silent pact was renewed. The trust they had forged in rebellion was now their single most important shield. She saw the man who had looked upon her darkest self and had not flinched. He saw the woman who had stood against her entire world for the sake of one life. It was a beautiful, still moment. And like all such moments in their new life, it was destined to be shattered. It began not with a siren, but with a feeling. A wave of pressure, so immense and so fundamentally alien, washed over the Seraite. It was not Retsu. It was something heavier, older. It was the crushing weight of a dead star, a pressure that didn't just push on the soul but seemed to compact it, to squeeze the very existence out of it. Every captain, every lieutenant, every seated officer froze, their breath catching in their chests. In the garden, the koi in the pond instantly died, floating to the surface. The leaves on the trees withered, turning black and crumbling to dust. The impossible white flower, which had never wilted, for the first time, began to droop. Naruto and Retsu were on their feet in an instant. Their eyes turned toward the sky. High above the central spire of the Seraite, the pearlescent twilight sky was tearing open. It was not the jagged, chaotic rip of a garganta. This was a smooth, silent incision. A perfect circle of absolute black that opened like an eye. And from that eye, something descended. It was humanoid in shape, but that was where the comparison to anything living ended. Its body was carved from a material that looked like polished obsidian, yet it absorbed all light. Jagged, crystalline structures, like shards of frozen starlight, grew from its shoulders and back. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless head that tilted as it surveyed the fortress below. This was no mindless echo. This was a being of purpose, of intellect, and of terrifying, ancient power. This was a null. A voice echoed, not through the air, but directly inside the mind of every soul in the Seraite. It was a voice of pure concept, cold, and final. Less than the anomaly of life will be corrected. Greater than. The null's faceless gaze swept over the Seraite, ignoring the flaring Retsu of a dozen captains as they burst from their barracks. It ignored the head captain's volcanic presence, it ignored the growling bloodlust of Kenpachi Zaraki. Its gaze passed over them all as if they were insects, finally settling, with pinpoint accuracy, on the 4th Division barracks. On him. Less than the source will be unmade. Greater than. In a movement that defied physics, the null vanished from the sky and reappeared directly over the 4th Division. It descended not with grace, but with the finality of a guillotine. Evacuate the barracks. Now. Unohana's voice rang out, the calm healer instantly replaced by the absolute commander. Her medics, though terrified, responded with ingrained discipline, beginning to move the wounded from the infirmaries. The null paid them no mind. Its focus was singular. It raised a hand, and a sphere of that same dead star energy formed, a miniature black hole that pulsed with negating power. It was aimed at the heart of the barracks, at the garden where Naruto stood. Naruto moved, a blur of white and gold. He appeared in the air between the null and the building below, his hands outstretched. A vast, intricate shield of golden life energy, shaped like a blooming lotus flower, materialized before him. The null's sphere of negation struck the shield. The impact was a silent, world-shaking cataclysm. The point of contact was not an explosion, but a war of concepts. The absolute, crushing force of oblivion met the boundless, generative force of life. The air for a mile in every direction warped and buckled. Buildings groaned, their foundations cracking. The very reishi of the atmosphere was being torn apart and rewritten. Naruto's feet hit the ground, carving deep furrows in the stone courtyard. The shield was holding, but the sheer, brute force pressure was immense. This thing was orders of magnitude more powerful than any echo he had faced. Retsu. Get everyone clear. He grunted. The muscles in his arms corded with strain. Unohana was already in motion, a shadow of deadly grace, her zanpakuto in her hand. She appeared at his side. I am not leaving you. The null, seeing its initial attack thwarted, tilted its head. Its silent, mental voice echoed again, this time with a sliver of what felt like cold, analytical curiosity. Less than the anomaly is shielded. The shield has an anchor. The anchor is life. The anchor will be severed. Greater than. The null's form blurred. It abandoned its direct assault on Naruto. Instead, it moved with an impossible, stuttering speed, its obsidian form phasing in and out of existence, appearing beside Naruto. It ignored him completely. Its crystalline hand, sharpened to a point that could sever the bonds of a soul, lashed out, aimed directly at Unohana's throat. It had identified her, not as a warrior, not as a threat, but as the emotional core of Naruto's stability. His weakness. Unohana's reactions were sublime. She moved, her blade coming up to parry in an arc of silver light. The clash of crystal on steel sent a shockwave that shattered every window in the barracks. She was thrown back, her feet skidding across the paving stones. A thin line of blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her blade had held, but the sheer kinetic force was beyond anything she had ever faced. Naruto roared, a sound of pure protective fury. He dropped the shield, letting the residual energy of the null's attack blast harmlessly into the sky, and spun, a golden spear of life energy forming in his hand. He thrust it at the null. But the creature was intelligent. It knew he would do this. It phased again, avoiding his strike, and reappeared on Unohana's other side, its attack relentless. It was a blur of black, crystalline death, forcing her into a desperate, purely defensive battle. Every parry sent shudders up her arms. Every dodge was a hair's breadth from annihilation. She was outmatched in raw physical power. Naruto was forced into a frustrating, deadly dance. He couldn't land a clean blow on the phasing creature, which focused solely on Unohana. He was forced to use his power to erect split-second barriers, to deflect blows meant for her. To heal the minor cuts that appeared on her skin before they could become major. They were being systematically separated and dismantled. Other captains were beginning to arrive. Shish. Unsui and Yukitaki appeared on a nearby rooftop, their faces grim. Toshiro Hitsugaya landed, ice already forming on his blade. But they couldn't intervene. The fight was too fast, too close quarters. An errant Kido or a misplaced slash would be as likely to hit Unohana as the null. Damn it, it's too fast. Hitsugaya growled. Its goal is Unohana Taicho, Yukitaki said, his voice tight with concern. It's trying to kill her to get to Uzumaki. The null pressed its advantage. It landed a solid blow, a backhanded strike that sent Unohana crashing into the wall of the infirmary, the stone cracking around her. She slumped to her knees, coughing up blood, her Retsu flickering. Seeing her fall, something in Naruto snapped. The calm, serene god vanished, and the protective, furious warrior he had always been roared to the surface. Get away from her. A torrent of golden energy, raw and untamed, exploded from him. It wasn't a controlled shield or a precise spear. It was a supernova of pure, unadulterated life force. The ground erupted. Giant, golden roots, thick as pillars, burst from the stone courtyard, lunging for the null, trying to ensnare it. The air itself became a thick, golden syrup, slowing the creature's movements. For the first time, the null was forced onto the defensive, its phasing ability hampered by the sheer density of the life energy flooding the area. It abandoned Unohana, turning its full attention to the furious golden god. Unohana pushed herself to her feet, wiping the blood from her lips. She looked at Naruto, a son of raw, world-shaping power, holding the monster at bay. She looked at her trembling medics, huddled at the edge of the battlefield. She looked at the wreckage of her home. This creature had made a fatal error. It had targeted her to hurt him. But in doing so, it had pushed her, the healer, the captain, past her breaking point. It had awoken the one thing in her that knew nothing of healing, only of absolute, final victory. It had awoken the Kenpachi. Her expression went cold. The serene mask, the gentle warmth, the captain's authority, it all melted away, leaving behind an abyss. An ancient, predatory emptiness that promised only death. The other captains felt it first. A spike of Retsu so dense, so bloodthirsty, so terrifyingly familiar from the oldest legends, that it made their souls freeze. Kenpachi Zaraki, who had just arrived on the scene with a manic grin, froze mid-stride, his grin vanishing. His eyes went wide. He knew that feeling. He had been chasing that feeling his entire life. Unohana raised her blade. The world seemed to hold its breath. Bankai. The word was not a shout. It was a final, damning whisper. Minazuki. And the world dissolved into blood. A thick, viscous, dark red liquid erupted from her blade, flooding the courtyard in a tidal wave. It was not blood. It was a conceptual acid that was the very essence of her Bankai. The sky overhead turned a sickening crimson. The air became thick and hot, smelling of rust and decay. The golden roots Naruto had summoned hissed and dissolved as the acid blood touched them. Her own body began to change. Her skin peeled back from her face and hands, revealing the skeletal structure beneath. Her flesh melting away and reforming in an endless, agonizing cycle of decay and regeneration. She had become a living avatar of death and destruction. The null, trapped in the sea of blood, let out a silent, psychic scream of agony. Its obsidian shell began to corrode, its crystalline spurs melting like wax. Its negation-based power was useless against an attack that wasn't energy, but a physical, all-consuming reality. The assembled captains could only stare in horror and disbelief. This was the captain of the 4th Division. The gentle healer. This blood-drenched skeleton. This goddess of slaughter. Naruto stared, his own golden aura pushed back by the sheer, overwhelming pressure of her Bankai. He saw her, not as a monster, but as a warrior pushed to the absolute limit. Sacrificing her own body, enduring the agony of constant dissolution, all to protect him. All to win. His fury transformed. The hot rage cooled into a profound, absolute resolve. She would not bear this burden alone. He closed his eyes, and his own power changed. The explosive, uncontrolled golden light receded, pulling inward, condensing until his entire body shone with the intensity of a star. He was no longer trying to just fight the null. He was going to override its existence. He opened his eyes. They were no longer just blue. They were solid gold, radiating a power so fundamental it made Unohana's terrifying Bankai seem like a temporary storm against an eternal sunrise. He raised his hand. The shattered stones of the courtyard, the dissolving roots, the very air itself, it all answered his call. He was not manipulating it. He was commanding its creation. A giant hand, woven from pure, solidified light and living matter, erupted from the ground beneath the sea of blood. It was a hand of a god. And it closed around the melting, screaming null, lifting it into the air, impervious to the acidic effects of Minazuki. Then, he made a fist. Inside the hand of light, the null was not just crushed. Its very concept was being compressed. The life energy was so absolute, so overwhelming, that it was forcibly injecting the concept of existence into a being of non-existence. It was a violation of universal law. The null convulsed one last time, and then, with a silent, implosive flash that bent the crimson sky, it was annihilated. Not unmade. Not destroyed. It was forcibly created into something unstable that instantly tore itself apart, leaving absolutely nothing behind. The battle was over. As the null was erased, Unohana's Bankai receded. The sea of blood drained away into nothingness. The crimson sky returned to its normal twilight. Her flesh reformed for the last time, her skin knitting back together over her bones. She fell to her knees, utterly spent. Her Zanpakuto clattering to the ground. The strain of using her Bankai for the first time in 1,000 years had pushed her to her absolute limit. Naruto's golden aura faded. He rushed to her side, catching her before she could collapse completely. He held her, his hand glowing with a gentle, restorative light as he poured his own life energy into her, mending the profound soul damage her own power had inflicted. He held her close, surrounded by the ruins of her barracks, under the stunned, disbelieving gazes of every captain of the Gote 13. Their secrets were out. The healer was a killer. The anomaly was a god. And their bond, now laid bare for all to see, was the new, terrifying, and undeniable center of their world. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Eve of Nothingness. The silence that followed the null's annihilation was more profound than any its kind had ever created. It was a silence of pure, earth-shattering shock. In the ruined courtyard of the 4th Division, the most powerful warriors in the Soul Society stood frozen, their minds struggling to process the two impossible truths they had just witnessed. Retsu Unohana, their gentle, serene paragon of healing, was the first Kenpachi. A demon of slaughter whose Bankai was a vision of hell itself. And Naruto Uzumaki, the mysterious outsider, was not merely a powerful being, he was a force of nature, a god who could command creation with a gesture and unmake their enemies with a thought. Naruto held the exhausted Unohana, pouring his gentle, golden energy into her, his focus entirely on her recovery. He was oblivious to the stares, the fear, the awe. In that moment, the rest of the world and its judgment did not exist. There was only the woman in his arms, who had unleashed her own personal hell to protect him. It was the gleeful, booming laugh of Kenpachi Zaraki that finally broke the spell. So that was it. He roared, his grin wider and more manic than ever before. He pointed his jagged blade not at Naruto, but at the kneeling Unohana. That feeling. The one I've been chasing, the one I've been trying to kill you to taste again. It was you. It was always you, Yakiru. His use of her old name, a name of legend and terror, sent a fresh wave of shock through the assembled captains. Shunsui Kyoraku's lazy demeanor had vanished, replaced by a grim, weary understanding. Soi Fan's face was a pale mask of disbelief. Her entire perception of strength and duty shattered. Before anyone else could react, a crushing weight descended upon them all. It was not the cold pressure of the null, but the searing, incandescent heat of pure, condensed rage. Head Captain Yamamoto stood at the edge of the courtyard, his small frame radiating more power than a star. His one visible eye was not blazing with fire, it was a chip of obsidian. Cold and absolute. Unohana. Uzumaki. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in their very bones. My office. Now. He turned and vanished in a flicker of shunpo that left the air scorched. The unspoken command was clear. The other captains knew not to follow. This was a reckoning. Naruto helped Retsu to her feet. She was weak, but her composure had returned, a mask of serene dignity settling over her profound exhaustion. She gave his hand a small, grateful squeeze before letting go. They walked together, side by side, through the wreckage, their steps synchronized. They did not look like prisoners on their way to judgment. They looked like two monarchs surveying their broken kingdom. The 1st Division hall was empty save for the old commander. He stood in the center of the vast room. His back to them, his hands clasped behind him. The air was thick with his centuries of authority and his current, simmering fury. For 1,000 years, Yamamoto began, his voice dangerously quiet. You have been the model of a Gote 13 captain. You have embodied the virtues of compassion, of order, of healing. You have been my most trusted, my most stable commander. He turned, and the fury in his eye was a terrible thing to behold. And it was all a lie. It was not a lie, Retsu replied, her voice steady, though it lacked its usual strength. It was a penance. The healer was as real as the killer. One was simply a cage for the other. A cage you kept hidden from me. From us all. Yamamoto slammed the butt of his cane sword, Ryujin Jaka, onto the floor. A wave of heat rolled through the room. The stone beneath their feet glowing a dull red. Your power, your true nature, is one of the foundational pillars of the Seraite's history. To hide it, to deck EIVE is for so long, it is an act of profound treason. It was a power that had no place in the world you built, she countered, her gaze unflinching. A world of order and law. The first Kenpachi belongs to an age of blood and chaos. I sealed that name away for the good of the Soul Society. And you? Yamamoto's fiery gaze shifted to Naruto. I granted you sanctuary. I gave you my trust. And you have brought this chaos. You have unmasked one of my captains, revealed secrets that could shatter the trust that holds the Gote 13 together, and demonstrated a power that rivals the Soul King himself. What are you? Before Naruto could answer, the world screamed. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A deep, seismic shudder that ran through the very soul of their reality. A low, grinding hum resonated from the stones, from the air. From their own bones. An aide from the 12th Division burst into the hall, his face ashen with terror, foregoing all protocol. Head Captain. The sensors. It's everywhere. Yamamoto's fury was instantly replaced by cold dread. Report. Spiritual vacuums. Hundreds of them. They're appearing all over the Soul Society. Not just in the Rukongai, but here. Inside the Seraite. As if on cue, a section of the far wall of the assembly hall simply vanished. There was no explosion, no dust. One moment, there was a solid stone wall adorned with ancient calligraphy. The next, there was a perfect, 50-foot circle of absolute, silent blackness that seemed to drink the light from the room. A void. A wound in the world. A horrified gasp came from the aide. He had been standing near that wall. The edge of the void had appeared less than an inch from his shoulder. He scrambled backward, his eyes wide with the terror of his near erasure. The defeat of the null, Naruto said, his voice grim. His eyes fixed on the hole in reality. It was a linchpin, a major component of the seal. By destroying it, we have critically weakened the prison. Another shudder racked the Seraite. From outside, they heard the first real screams of panic. Another aide burst in. Report from the 2nd Division. A crack has appeared across the Sokyoku Hill. It is consuming the execution grounds. This was no longer an attack. This was the beginning of the end. The void progenitor, the patient, silent hunger, was beginning to wake, and its prison was crumbling around it. Yamamoto's personal anger, his sense of betrayal, it all seemed so petty, so meaningless in the face of annihilation. He looked at the hole in his wall, then at Naruto and Unohana. They were no longer traitors or anomalies. They were all that stood between existence and the silent, hungry dark. What do we do? The old commander asked, the question a quiet admission of his own power's inadequacy. His flames could burn worlds. But you could not burn nothing. Naruto's gaze became distant, his eyes losing focus. Fighting these cracks is useless. It's like trying to bail out the ocean with a cup. We have to go to the source. We have to confront the progenitor itself. He closed his eyes. The subtle golden light that always seemed to linger beneath his skin began to shine, brighter and brighter. He was not preparing for a fight. He was reaching out, expanding his senses beyond the physical confines of the Seraite, beyond the Soul Society itself. He became a living, divine sensor, his consciousness touching upon the flow of every soul in every world. He felt the teeming billions in the world of the living, the hollow emptiness of Hueco Mundo, the ordered ranks of the Soul Society. He felt them as great rivers of life, all flowing in the grand cycle. And now, he felt a new current. A terrible, cosmic drain. All the rivers, all the streams of life, were beginning to tilt, to flow toward a single, invisible point. A crack in the bottom of the universe. I have it, he breathed, his eyes snapping open. They glowed with a profound, cosmic light. The seal. It isn't in any of the three worlds. It's in a dimensional gap, a nexus that holds them all in balance. That's where it's imprisoned. That's where we have to go. The gravity of his words settled in the room. This was not a fortress to be assaulted or an army to be fought. This was a journey into the heart of a conceptual prison, into a place that was likely outside of reality itself. We will assemble the full might of the Gote 13, Yamamoto declared. His voice a steel rod of command once more. No, Naruto said, his voice quiet but absolute. You can't. Your power, Ryutsu, it's a part of this reality. Where I'm going, it won't exist. Your swords will be useless lengths of steel. Your Kido will be empty words. You would be unmade the moment you entered. He looked at the most powerful Shinigami in history. Only I can go. My power comes from life itself, a concept that exists independent of this world's rules. I am the only one who can survive there. The finality of his statement was absolute. He was declaring his intention to face the end of all things, alone. It was a suicide mission. A final, desperate sacrifice. Yamamoto stared at him, the centuries of pride and power in his old bones warring with the stark, undeniable truth. He saw the same resolve in this young man's eyes that he had seen in his own, so long ago, when he first founded the Gote 13. What you need from us? The head captain asked. His voice rough with an emotion Naruto couldn't quite decipher. Keep this world from falling apart while I'm gone, Naruto said. Fight the cracks. Protect the souls. Give me the time I need. The news spread through the Seraite not as an order, but as a final, desperate prayer. The captains, their earlier shock and anger forgotten, rallied. Their enemy was no longer a secret kept by one of their own, but the yawning abyss at their doorstep. Their purpose was clear, unified for the first time since the crisis began. Later, as the twilight deepened, Naruto stood in the ruins of the 4th Division's garden. The single white flower was completely black now, withered and dead. He knelt, touching its dead petals, a profound sadness in his heart. It was a symbol of the life he had brought to this world. And now it too was succumbing to the encroaching silence. It can be replanted. He looked up. Retsu stood there, her captain's Haori repaired, her face calm, her eyes holding a department of understanding that eclipsed all others. She had come not to say goodbye, but for something else. You should be resting, he said softly. There is no time for rest, she countered, walking to stand beside him. She looked out at the Seraite, where captains were already barking orders, directing their divisions to erect massive Kido barriers around the spreading cracks of nothingness. They are preparing for a war they cannot win. They are buying you time. It's all they can do, he said, his gaze returning to the dead flower. It is not all we can do, she said, her voice firm. He looked up at her, a question in his eyes. You are not going alone, Naruto. It was not a request. It was a statement of unbreakable fact. Retsu, you heard what I said, he began, standing to face her. You can't survive there. You're Ryutsu. I am not just my Ryutsu, she interrupted, her voice ringing with a conviction he had never heard from her before. I am the first Kenpachi. My mastery is not of energy, but of the blade. Of the act of ending. Of death itself. She took a step closer, her dark eyes boring into his. You are a being of pure life. Of creation. You are going to face a being of pure oblivion. You intend to fight nothingness with Genesis. It is a beautiful, noble, and suicidally foolish idea. It's the only way. No, she said, her voice dropping to an intense, intimate whisper. It is half of the way. To create balance, you need both sides of the scale. You need life, but you also need death. You are the unstoppable force of creation. I am the immovable object of finality. Together, we are balance. Your power will shield us, create a reality for us to stand in. My blade will be the edge of that reality, the concept that severs and ends any part of the void that tries to encroach. You are the sun. I am the edge of the shadow it casts. One cannot exist without the other. He stared at her, speechless. She was not offering to die with him out of love or loyalty. She was presenting a flawless, undeniable strategic argument. She had analyzed the nature of their enemy, the nature of their own powers, and had come to the only logical conclusion. Their bond was not a weakness for the enemy to exploit, it was the single greatest weapon they possessed. I won't let you sacrifice yourself, he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Her expression softened. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Did you truly believe I would let you face the end of all things alone? I did not defy my entire world just to watch you walk away. She reached up, her hand gently cupping his cheek. Her touch was warm, real, an anchor in the storm of their reality. I spent 1,000 years in a cage of my own making, Naruto. Alone. You did not just break down the bars. You showed me that the monster I had locked away was not a monster at all, but simply, the other half of myself. My place is with you. At the heart of creation, or in the silent embrace of the void. It makes no difference. As long as we are together. He looked into her eyes and saw his own future reflected there. He saw the end of his loneliness. He saw a purpose greater than just surviving. Greater than just protecting. He saw a beginning. He leaned in, and their lips met for the first time. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound, silent understanding. It was a vow. A promise made on the eve of nothingness, a final, defiant spark of life and love against the encroaching, absolute dark. When they broke apart, the decision was made. They would face it together. They would be the first dawn. Or the final twilight. But they would face it as one. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The First Dawn. The air atop Sokyoku Hill crackled with a power that had not been gathered in one place for over 1,000 years. The full complement of the Gote 13 stood in a solemn, silent formation, their captain's houri stark white against the bruised twilight of the wounded sky. The ground beneath their feet was a spiderweb of cracks, some of which glowed with the raw, contained energy of keto barriers erected to stop them from yawning into oblivion. The entire Soul Society held its breath, its fate resting on the two figures who stood at the hill's precipice. Naruto and Unohana stood before a shimmering tear in space, a crack wider and more stable than the others, held open by a gentle, constant pressure from Naruto's own golden energy. It did not lead to the blackness of the void, but to a swirling, colorless mist that seemed to defy perception. Head Captain Yamamoto stood before them, his ancient face carved with the weight of the world. There is no precedent for this, he said, his voice a low rumble. No map. No scripture that speaks of what lies beyond that gate. We will make our own map. Naruto replied, his voice calm and certain. He looked at the gathered captains, at the faces of men and women who, just days before, had viewed him with suspicion and fear. Now, he saw only a desperate, unified hope. He saw Shunsui, who gave him a solemn nod. He saw Byakuya, whose stoic expression held a flicker of grudging respect. He saw Zaraki, whose manic grin for once was not of bloodlust, but of sheer, exhilarating awe at the scale of the fight to come. The Soul Society is in your hands, Naruto said to them. Protect it. We will do the rest. Unohana stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her Zanpakuto. She looked at Yamamoto, her former commander, and offered a slight, respectful bow. Thank you for the life you gave me, Genryu Sai Dono. It was a farewell from Retsu Unohana, the captain, and an absolution for Yakiru Kenpachi, the killer. Yamamoto simply closed his eyes. Return victorious. With a final, shared look, a universe of understanding passing between them. Naruto and Unohana stepped through the shimmering gate and into the space between worlds. The sensation was one of absolute dislocation. It was not a place, but an absence of place. There was no up or down. No light or sound. The very concept of direction was meaningless. Their bodies, their very souls, felt as though they were being pulled apart, atom by atom, by the sheer lack of a cohesive reality to hold them together. But they were not torn asunder. A sphere of soft, golden light enveloped them, a pocket of stability in the chaos. At its center stood Naruto, his eyes closed, his hands outstretched. He was not just shielding them, he was actively projecting a small, temporary reality around them. A floor of smooth, golden light solidified beneath their feet. The air became breathable. They were an island of existence in an ocean of uncreation. So this is it, Unohana breathed, her voice startlingly clear within their golden bubble. She looked out at the swirling, formless chaos beyond. The foundations of the worlds. This is just the hallway, Naruto said grimly, opening his eyes. They shone like twin suns in the dimness. The prison is deeper. He pointed. In the distance, through the mists of non-reality, was a point of perfect, absolute black. A hole in the nothingness. As they drew closer, they could feel the pull, the cosmic drain T. Hat was sucking the life out of all creation. As they approached the epicenter, the golden sphere of Naruto's protection began to flicker. The pressure was immense. It was a conceptual weight, the presence of the void progenitor pressing in on them. A voice entered their minds. It was not sound, but pure thought, cold, Vast, and ancient. Asterisk asterisk less than flaw. Greater than less than error. Greater than less than temporary anomalies of complexity. Greater than less than you have come to be corrected. Greater than less than it is the fate of all things. Greater than less than I am that fate. Greater than. The sphere of blackness pulsed, and the true nature of their prison became clear. It wasn't a room or a cage. It was a single, infinitely dense point of oblivion, around which reality itself was stretched thin, like a blanket over a rock. The cracks appearing in the soul society were tears in that strained fabric. It's not a creature, Unohana murmured, her hand tightening on her sword. It's a truth. Then we have to write a new one, Naruto replied. He looked at her, his expression one of absolute trust. Are you ready? I have been ready for 1,000 years, she said, her voice devoid of fear. Naruto took a deep breath and plunged his will outward. The small bubble of golden light they stood in exploded, expanding with the force of a genesis. He was not attacking the void. He was overriding it. Where there was formless chaos, he created light. A soft, dawn-like glow that pushed back the oppressive darkness. Where there was silence, he created the sound of a gentle, blowing wind. Beneath their feet, the floor of light became solid ground, grass sprouting from it, cool and green. He was creating a world, a nascent universe. In the very heart of its antithesis. The strain was unimaginable. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his entire body trembling with the effort of holding back entropy itself. The void reacted. It did not see this as an attack, but as a cancer. A corruption of its perfect purity. From the central point of blackness, tendrils of nothingness, darker than the space around them, lashed out. They were not physical. They were lines of pure negation, seeking to unmake Naruto's fledgling creation from the edges. This was her moment. Unohana stood at the border of the growing island of life, her back to Naruto. Facing the encroaching void, her serene face was a mask of absolute focus. Bankai. Minazuki. The world of blood did not erupt around them. Here, in this conceptual space, her power was different. It was purer. A crimson aura, dark and thick as blood, coated her blade. As the first tendril of nothingness touched the edge of their reality, she swung. Her blade did not clash against it. It passed through it, and the tendril of the void simply ended. It was not destroyed or repelled. Its conceptual existence was terminated. Where her blade passed, she had created a definitive, absolute end. She moved with a lethal, beautiful grace, a guardian on the shore of a new creation. Every swing of her sword was a final judgment. Every arc defined the boundary between being and not being. The first Kenpachi had found her ultimate purpose. She was not a mere killer of men. She was the arbiter of finality, the one who decided where existence itself must stop. Asterisk asterisk less than paradox. Greater than less than life defines an end. Death protects a beginning. Greater than less than this is illogical. Greater than. The void's cold, analytical voice echoed in their minds, now tinged with something akin to confusion. It could not comprehend them. They were a violation of all known universal laws. Realizing its tendrils were useless, the void changed its tactics. It focused its full, crushing weight directly onto their minds. Naruto's vision swam. He was no longer in the void. He was back in his world, watching as the final, terrible blast of energy consumed everything. He saw Hinata's face, Kakashi's, Sakura's, Sasuke's, all of them turning to dust before his eyes. The grief was a physical force, a mountain pressing down on him, urging him to just let go, to surrender to the peace of the end. His creation flickered, the light dimming. Unohana found herself in a different hell. She was alone on an endless battlefield of corpses, all slain by her hand. The silence was absolute. She was the strongest. Forever. He saw a vision of the next 1,000 years, and the 1,000 after that, a lonely, unchanging existence with no purpose, no challenge, no connection. The emptiness she had fled for a millennium beckoned to her, promising a final release from the burden of her own strength. Their creations were faltering. The void was winning the war of wills. Then, through the phantom grief, Naruto felt a hand slip into his. It was warm, real. He looked, and Unohana was there, standing beside him in the heart of their new world, her own face etched with pain, but her eyes were fixed on his, a bedrock of unyielding strength. I am not alone anymore. She sent to him, not with words, but with a thought, a feeling. He gripped her hand, his anchor in the storm of his past. Neither am I. Their bond, their shared truth, became a shield that their individual grief could not pierce. They were no longer two lonely souls carrying impossible burdens. They were one, a perfect, balanced whole. The visions shattered. Less than this. Bond, greater than less than it is the strongest reality. Greater than less than it cannot be unmade. Greater than. The void's voice held a new note. Not confusion. Not anger. It was awe. Naruto looked at Retsu, a final plan forming in his mind, conveyed in a single glance. She nodded. He let go of her hand and raised both of his to the sky of his new world. He pulled all of his focus, all of his life force, not to fight, but to build. The island of green grass and gentle light expanded exponentially. A sun bloomed into existence overhead. Stars began to pepper the new sky. He wasn't just creating a shield. He was forging a new universe. Unohana stood at its center. Her sword held high, the crimson aura of her bankai acting as a metaphysical anchor, declaring, "Here, existence holds. Here, the void ends." They didn't destroy the progenitor. They gave it a new purpose. They built a new, self-sustaining reality around its core, a perfect prison of infinite life and complexity. They contained the absolute end within an endless beginning. The ultimate balance had been struck. As the final star settled into its place in the new cosmos, the crushing pressure vanished. The telepathic voice went silent. The drain on the universe ceased. Their work was done. Exhausted to their very souls, they collapsed into each other's arms. Naruto, with the last of his strength, opened a shimmering doorway back to the only home they had left. They stumbled out onto Sokyoku Hill. The sky above the Soul Society was no longer a bruised twilight. The cracks were gone. The air felt clean, stable. The oppressive dread had lifted. They had won. The assembled captains stared, their faces a mixture of relief and utter awe. Naruto and Unohana stood before them, leaning on each other for support, their clothes torn, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. But their spirits were intertwined, shining brighter than any Zanpakuto. A few days later, peace had returned to the Seraite. The 4th Division barracks were being rebuilt, the sounds of hammers and construction replacing the echoes of battle. In the center of the garden, Naruto knelt on a patch of fresh, dark earth. He pressed a single seed into the soil. He poured a tiny, gentle stream of golden life into it. The seed sprouted, growing with impossible speed into a tall, elegant stalk. A single, white flower bloomed at its peak, its petals unfurling in the quiet afternoon. It was as perfect as the first one had been. But this time, on the very edge of one pristine, white petal, was a single, tiny fleck of vivid crimson. A perfect flaw, a symbol of balance. Retsu came and knelt beside him, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. They looked at the flower, then at each other. The weight of their pasts, the lonely Jinchuriki, the solitary Kenpachi, was finally gone, replaced by the certainty of a shared future. The first dawn, she whispered, a small, genuine smile on her lips. A new beginning, he agreed, placing his hand over hers. Far away, in his secluded office, Sosuke Aizen sat before his Go board. The complex pattern of black and white stones represented his centuries of planning, his meticulous path to the throne of heaven. He picked up a single white stone, the one he had set aside. With a deliberate, thoughtful motion, he placed it on the board, not in opposition to his own black stones, but beside them, creating a new, impossibly complex pattern. He looked at the board, at the game he thought he had mastered, and saw it transformed into something infinitely more grand, more beautiful, more challenging. He smiled. A true smile, not of deceit or arrogance, but of pure, unadulterated anticipation. He had sought to become a god, to stand above all others. But Naruto Uzumaki and Retsu Unohana had done something far more profound. They had shown him what it truly meant to create a world. The game was not over. It had just begun. Chapter 10 End.